Welcome back to Animal Quests. In this video, we jump into stories of hunters being hunted by their own prey. From Russia's frozen mountains, where following the wrong tracks led two friends into a predator's territory, to an enraged 8,000-pound elephant's deadly charge across the Serengeti. It was October 14, 2016, in the remote Sikhote-Alin Mountains of Primorsky Krai, Russia, where ancient conifer forests stretched endlessly beneath gray autumn skies. The dense woodland, blanketed in fresh snow, had become a hunting ground where two worlds would collide with devastating consequences. Temperatures hovered near freezing as wind whistled through towering pines, creating an eerie symphony that masked the sounds of approaching danger. Gant Ridge, a 42-year-old American oil field contractor, had traveled thousands of miles for this licensed wild boar hunt. His weathered hands spoke of years working harsh environments across Alaska's North Slope, while his keen eyes reflected the experience of a seasoned North American hunter who had tracked everything from white-tailed deer to black bears. Beside him stood Victor Smith, a 39-year-old Canadian wildlife photographer whose passion for capturing nature's raw beauty had led him to pursue recreational hunting as a deeper connection to the wilderness he so loved to document. The Russian outfitter had issued stern warnings about recent tiger activity throughout the region. Livestock predation had increased over the past month, and fresh pug marks overlapped deer tracks throughout the snow-covered terrain. Local rangers reported defensive encounters near kill sites, and the ominous signs were everywhere for those who knew how to read them. Despite these warnings, the men pressed forward through the snow-laden forest, following what appeared to be wild boar trails near a known deer migration corridor. The promise of trophy boar had clouded their judgment about the apex predator that ruled these mountains. The Siberian tiger, the largest living cat subspecies and apex predator of the Russian Far East, represents one of nature's most formidable hunters. Adult males typically weigh between 400 and 600 pounds, with rare individuals documented above 650. Their estimated bite force ranges from roughly 950 to just over 1,000 psi, delivered through 4-inch canines designed to suffocate or sever vital vessels. Massive forelimbs allow them to grapple prey and break cervical vertebrae with sustained force rather than casual swipes. Their broad paws distribute weight efficiently across snow, enabling near-silent movement, while their striped coats dissolve into forest shadow. These territorial predators fiercely defend fresh kills, often caching prey beneath snow and debris before returning to feed for several days. The fatal mistake came when Ridge and Smith followed fresh tiger tracks directly to a partially covered red deer carcass hidden beneath pine boughs and snow. The metallic scent of blood hung heavy in the frigid air, and faint steam still rose from exposed tissue, clear indicators the kill was recent and the predator likely nearby. Instead of retreating immediately, they lingered within striking distance of the cache, examining the carcass with fatal curiosity. When movement rustled the dense brush approximately 20 meters away, Ridge raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the vegetation, a decision that triggered the tiger's defensive response. The forest's thick canopy reduced visibility to only a few meters as the massive predator exploded from cover with terrifying speed. The roughly 500-pound tiger covered the distance in seconds, its powerful hindquarters driving it forward in a blur of muscle and snow. Victor, standing closest to the carcass while photographing the scene, absorbed the initial charge. The impact hurled him backward onto the frozen ground with crushing force. Powerful jaws clamped around Victor's throat, the tiger's canines puncturing deep into soft tissue while compressing his airway and major vessels. The sustained bite caused catastrophic damage to the carotid artery and jugular vein. Blood pulsed heavily into the snow as oxygen flow to his brain collapsed. Victor lost consciousness within seconds, his body going limp shortly thereafter, as rapid blood loss and cerebral hypoxia took hold. Ridge's desperate shot grazed the tiger's shoulder, prompting a brief disengagement. As he moved toward his fallen friend, the wounded predator re-emerged with intensified aggression. A massive forelimb strike knocked Ridge off balance, the force sufficient to fracture bone and drive him into the snow. Before he could regain footing, the tiger seized his upper chest and neck area. Its canines penetrated deeply, severing major vessels near the shoulder and thoracic inlet. Massive hemorrhage followed, and Ridge's strength faded rapidly as blood loss became unsurvivable within moments. After neutralizing the perceived threats to its cached prey, the tiger withdrew into the forest, disappearing between the dark trunks as silently as it had appeared. Both men succumbed quickly to exsanguination in the Russian wilderness, their bodies discovered hours later when they failed to return to base camp. Russian authorities initiated an investigation, while wildlife officials assessed whether the tiger's behavior was defensive rather than predatory. The international hunting community mourned the loss of two experienced outdoorsmen whose familiarity with wilderness risk had not been been enough. Their families struggled to comprehend how a routine expedition for wild boar had ended with such devastating finality in one of the planet's most unforgiving ecosystems. It was November 3rd, 2013, when the late spring heat shimmered across the scrublands of the Kalahari Desert in eastern Botswana. The dry season was ending, and wildlife had begun concentrating near scattered waterholes. For Darian Kumalo, a 45-year-old bow hunter from Johannesburg, this represented the culmination of 2 years of planning for his first African lion hunt. Darian had built his reputation pursuing dangerous game with archery equipment, considering rifle hunting unsporting. His collection included Cape buffalo and leopard taken with compound bow, and a lion would complete his dangerous game slam. He had paid $38,000 for the fully guided hunt in a private concession bordering a national park. The professional hunter was Nicholas Venter, a 52-year-old guide with 26 years of experience. Nicholas had guided over 40 lion hunts, though he privately questioned bow hunting for such dangerous game. The reduced lethality of arrows meant wounded animals were significantly more common, creating dangerous situations for everyone involved. He had expressed these concerns to Darian before the hunt, but the client had been dismissive. The hunting party had located a coalition of 3 male lions the previous afternoon, resting near a dry riverbed. Nicholas identified a mature male with a dark mane as the trophy animal. The approach was made from a ground blind near a bait site, the standard method for bow hunting dangerous game, where archery's reduced range required close proximity. Darian's first arrow struck the lion in the shoulder area, but the broadhead failed to reach vital organs. The lion bolted into dense acacia scrub, leaving a blood trail indicating a survivable wound. Nicholas insisted on a full 4-hour wait before tracking, allowing the wounded animal time to lie down and stiffen. Those hours passed slowly, the tension building as everyone understood what they would be walking into. African lions are apex predators with males weighing between 350 and 420 pounds. Wounded lions are extraordinarily dangerous, their aggression amplified by pain and defensive instincts. Unlike prey species that flee when injured, lions frequently adopt ambush positions, using dense cover to stage counterattacks against pursuers. Their powerful jaws can crush bone, and their claws inflict deep, tearing wounds. Lions have been documented circling behind tracking parties to launch attacks from unexpected angles. After the extended wait, Nicholas and Darian began following the blood trail on foot, with 2 trackers providing support. They moved slowly through dense thorn scrub, where visibility dropped to barely 20 feet. Nicholas carried a heavy-caliber rifle as backup. Every few steps, the team paused to listen, for breathing, for the rustle of movement, for anything that might betray the lion's position. The blood trail led approximately 400 yards before the drops became less frequent, indicating the arrow had either fallen out or the wound was clotting. They had covered another 150 yards when the trackers located a spot where the lion had bedded down, the disturbed earth and blood indicating the animal had rested before moving on. The bed was still warm. What Nicholas couldn't know was that the wounded lion had heard the tracking party's approach and moved in a wide circle through the dense scrub. The lion's pain and defensive aggression had triggered its ambush instincts, and the animal now stalked its pursuers from barely 40 feet away, using the same cover that concealed it from its natural prey. Group had paused to reassess the trail when the lion launched its attack. The massive male burst from dense cover to Darian's left, covering the distance in 3 explosive bounds before anyone could react. Nicholas had been facing the opposite direction, his rifle pointed away from the threat. The lion's 400-pound body slammed into Darian, knocking him completely off his feet. He crashed to the ground as the lion's claws raked across his chest and shoulders, shredding through his hunting vest and opening deep gashes from collarbone to sternum. The lion's jaws closed on Darian's left shoulder and neck, fracturing his clavicle and severing major blood vessels. Nicholas spun and fired twice in rapid succession, both shots striking the lion in the ribcage and spine. The massive cat released its grip and collapsed sideways. The spinal hit paralyzed its hindquarters instantly, but the lion continued to thrash and snap with its forelegs and jaws for several more seconds before blood loss from the rifle wounds caused it to go still. Darian lay motionless, blood pouring from the devastating neck and shoulder wounds. The lion's bite had severed his carotid artery. He lost consciousness almost immediately, and despite Nicholas applying pressure while calling for emergency evacuation, Darian died within a minute. The blood loss was simply too massive and too rapid to survive. A chartered evacuation helicopter arrived within 40 minutes, but could only transport Darian's body and the lion back to camp. The investigation ruled it a hunting accident with no criminal charges. The Professional Hunting Association implemented stricter guidelines for bow hunting dangerous game, though the practice remained legal. Nicholas retired from professional hunting 6 months later. It was July 12, 2015, and pre-dawn darkness still blanketed the dense riverine bush of a private game reserve in South Africa's Limpopo province. The dry winter season had left the vegetation thick but brittle, with visibility reduced to mere feet in the tangled undergrowth. The reserve bordered a major national park, an area known for its leopard population and minimal overnight security presence. Fanelo Maluleke was a 34-year-old former tracker who had worked at safari lodges before being dismissed 2 years earlier for suspected involvement in wildlife crimes. The collapse of legitimate employment had pushed him toward illegal hunting, specifically targeting leopard pelts that commanded premium prices through cross-border smuggling networks. A single high-quality pelt could fetch $3,000 from buyers in Mozambique. Maluleke had set his snare line 3 nights earlier, positioning 12 wire snares along known leopard paths near a seasonal riverbed. Wire loops anchored to trees would tighten around any animal that walked through, restraining them until the trapper returned. He operated alone, believing solo work reduced the risk of betrayal and kept profits undivided. The morning check began around 5:45, Maluleke moving quietly through dense bush with a machete and wire cutters. He carried no firearm, as gunshots would alert reserve rangers. His plan was to complete the check and exit before full sunrise. African leopards are solitary nocturnal predators that can weigh up to 200 pounds and are among the strongest big cats relative to their size. They possess explosive acceleration, reaching 36 miles per hour in short bursts, with bite force exceeding 400 pounds per square inch and retractable claws up to 2 inches long. They are ambush hunters targeting the throat and neck. When injured or cornered, they become extraordinarily aggressive and unpredictable. Maluleke approached his 7th snare location, pushing through thick undergrowth along the riverbank. The snare had captured a male leopard, approximately 160 pounds, sometime during the previous night. The wire had tightened around its left rear leg, restraining but not incapacitating the animal. Surrounding vegetation was torn and scattered in a 15-foot radius. When Maluleke came within 10 feet of the trapped leopard, the wire snare broke. The weakened anchor point, stressed by hours of the leopard's struggles, finally failed. The big cat was suddenly free but still carried 3 feet of wire trailing from his injured leg. The combination of pain, exhaustion, and stress made the leopard extraordinarily dangerous. The leopard launched his attack from the dense cover where he had been resting. Based on scene evidence, investigators determined that the explosive charge covered the distance in under 2 seconds, giving Maluleke no time to react. The big cat's claws extended fully as he struck, hooking deep into Maluleke's chest and shoulders as the momentum carried both of them to the ground. Injuries to Maluleke's neck were consistent with the leopard clamping his jaws around the side of the throat, a crushing bite compressing the airway and major blood vessels beneath the jaw. The powerful neck muscles would have applied sustained pressure as the big cat maintained his grip. Deep parallel gouges in the earth showed where Maluleke had been driven backward by the leopard's momentum, his body pinned beneath the animal's full weight. Claw marks scored across his chest and shoulders indicated repeated raking motions consistent with a leopard anchoring itself to its prey. Investigators estimated the attack lasted no more than a few minutes, based on the limited disturbance pattern at the scene. The leopard maintained his grip until the threat had been neutralized, then released and backed away, moving into the dense riverine bush. Track evidence showed the leopard departed the immediate area, the trailing wire snare eventually working free several hundred yards away. Reserve rangers discovered Maluleke's body around midday, after noting his vehicle parked illegally near the reserve boundary. The scene investigation revealed the snare trap operation, with wire loops and tools recovered along the trap line. The fatal attack site showed clear evidence of leopard involvement, with tracks and the broken snare wire confirming the sequence of events. Investigators determined that Maluleke had died from suffocation and massive blood loss, with deep claw wounds across his upper body and crushing trauma to the neck consistent with a rapidly fatal attack. The investigation identified him as a suspected wildlife criminal, with his death ruled as the consequence of illegal hunting activities. The leopard was never located, likely having moved deep into the adjacent national park. It was November 19, 2015, when the misty Danube floodplains of southern Romania became the setting for a deadly encounter that would demonstrate why wild boar remain one of Europe's most feared and dangerous animals. The ancient wetlands stretched endlessly across the landscape, where dense reed beds bordered harvested farmland and morning fog clung to the waterlogged terrain. This primeval hunting ground had witnessed countless driven hunts over the centuries, where tradition and danger walked hand in hand through the marshes. Bixley Gunt, a 52-year-old agricultural equipment salesman from Bucharest, had participated in driven hunts across Romania for over 2 decades. His confident demeanor and extensive experience had earned him respect among local hunting circles, though his impatience with strict safety spacing rules often concerned his fellow hunters. On this cold November morning, he was positioned near the dense reeds that formed a natural barrier between the wetlands and the recently harvested cornfields, a strategic location where driven game would likely emerge. The morning hunt had been organized with military precision, as Romanian driven hunts traditionally demanded. Beaters moved methodically through the distant reed beds, their voices and the sound of sticks against vegetation designed to push wild boar toward the waiting line of hunters. Bixley's position offered excellent visibility across the open farmland, but the towering reeds behind him created a wall of golden stalks that could conceal even the largest animals until they were dangerously close. The warning signs were abundant for those experienced enough to recognize them. Fresh, rooting scars marked the muddy ground where powerful snouts had torn through the earth in search of roots and grubs. Snapped reed stalks lay scattered across the area, broken by the passage of something large and powerful. The churned mud bore the distinctive hoofprints of a solitary boar, indicating an animal of considerable size moving through the area recently. Wild boar are among Europe's most formidable and unpredictable animals, with large adult males weighing between 300 and 500 pounds and armed with razor-sharp tusks that can grow up to 7 inches long. These ancient survivors possess incredible strength and compact muscularity, capable of charging at speeds exceeding 25 miles per hour through terrain that would stop most other animals. Their tusks, constantly sharpened by grinding against each other, can slice through flesh and bone with devastating efficiency. Unlike domestic pigs, wild boar retain all their primitive survival instincts, making them extremely dangerous when cornered or surprised. Bixley's fatal mistake came when he abandoned his assigned position and stepped into the thick reed cover to improve his shooting angle. The dense vegetation that had seemed like mere concealment was actually harboring a massive solitary boar that had broken away from the main group being driven by the beaters. The animal, already agitated by the sounds of the hunt and the presence of humans, was positioned directly in the path Bixley chose to take. The attack erupted with explosive violence as the boar burst from the reeds at point-blank range. The massive animal, weighing nearly 480 pounds, struck Bixley's legs with the force of a battering ram, its muscular shoulder and head driving into him with bone-crushing impact. The collision sent him crashing to the muddy ground, his rifle flying from his grasp as he hit the waterlogged earth with devastating force. The boar's tusks tore into Bixley's thigh and groin area in the violent chaos of the attack. The razor-sharp ivory slashed through flesh and muscle in wild, uncontrolled arcs as the panicked animal thrashed and gouged. Blood immediately began pouring from the ragged wounds as the tusks ripped through tissue, tearing open major blood vessels in the brutal melee. In its panic to escape, the boar trampled over Bixley as it fled, its sharp hooves striking his chest and abdomen. The animal's weight, concentrated into relatively small hoofprints, created crushing injuries that compounded the devastating tusk wounds. The combination of penetrating trauma from the tusks and the trampling injuries during escape created a catastrophic pattern of damage. The massive hemorrhaging from the torn vessels in his leg and groin proved fatal within minutes. The boar's tusks had ripped through the femoral artery, and the resulting blood loss was too severe for survival in such a remote location. The animal fled into the distance, crashing through the reeds toward the deeper marshland. The other hunters heard the commotion and rushed to investigate, but the damage had already been done. The entire encounter lasted for a few minutes, yet it demonstrated the lethal efficiency of one of Europe's most dangerous game animals. Romanian authorities launched an immediate investigation into the incident, focusing on whether proper safety protocols had been followed during the driven hunt. The incident sent shockwaves through Romania's hunting community, where wild boar attacks, while rare, are always feared due to the animal's unpredictable nature and devastating weaponry. Bixley's family and fellow hunters mourned the loss of an experienced sportsman who had dedicated decades to the traditional hunting practices of his homeland. His death served as a stark reminder that even the most experienced hunters can fall victim to the split-second decisions that separate life and death in the wilderness. It was June 7, 2015, and the Luangwa River flowed sluggishly through the South Luangwa Valley. The dry season had reduced the river to a fraction of its wet season width, concentrating wildlife along remaining water sources. Joseph Firi was a 41-year-old subsistence hunter from the village of Mfue, located on the outskirts of South Luangwa National Park. Unlike organized syndicates targeting high-value species, Phiri operated independently, selling bushmeat to local markets. His hunting activities fell into a legal gray area, as traditional hunting rights conflicted with national wildlife regulations. Phiri had hunted the Luangwa Valley since childhood, learning wildlife patterns and techniques for evading park rangers. His preferred targets included impala, puku, and warthog. However, the increasing scarcity of easy game near the village had pushed Phiri to venture closer to the river, where larger predators also concentrated. The morning's expedition included Phiri's nephew, 23-year-old Thomas Banda, who was learning the hunting trade. Banda had accompanied Phiri on several previous trips, proving himself competent with the antiquated single-shot rifle they shared. Their target was a small group of puku observed grazing along the riverbank approximately 2 miles upstream. The route required crossing a shallow inlet where the river had receded, leaving a muddy channel approximately 30 feet wide and less than 3 feet deep in most places. Phiri had crossed this channel dozens of times during previous dry seasons without incident. Nile crocodiles represent Africa's largest freshwater predator, with mature males commonly exceeding 16 feet in length and weights approaching 1,650 pounds. Crocodiles possess the strongest bite force of any living animal, generating pressures exceeding 3,700 pounds per square inch, sufficient to crush bone and dismember prey. Their attack pattern involves explosive acceleration from concealment, followed by the death roll, a spinning maneuver designed to disorient prey and tear away flesh. Crocodiles can remain submerged and motionless for over an hour, their massive bodies hidden below murky surfaces. The crocodile had been resting in deeper water since before dawn. The 17-foot male had dominated this stretch of river for over 2 decades, having learned to associate human activity with potential prey after successfully taking several goats and dogs over the years. Phiri entered the water first, his rifle held above his head to keep the action dry. The muddy water obscured everything below the surface, revealing nothing of what waited beneath. He was approximately halfway across, the water reaching his waist, when the attack occurred. The crocodile's strike came from directly ahead, massive jaws emerging with explosive force. The initial bite clamped around Phiri's right thigh and hip, interlocking teeth penetrating deep into muscle tissue and grinding against the bone. His rifle flew from his grasp, disappearing into the murky water. The crocodile immediately initiated the death roll, spinning its massive body while maintaining its grip on Phiri's leg. Phiri's thigh bone snapped within the first rotation, the sickening crack lost beneath the churning water. The hip joint dislocated completely during the second rotation as the muscle and ligament tore away from the pelvis. Banda watched from the riverbank, unable to intervene without a weapon and unwilling to enter the water. His uncle's screams were cut short as the crocodile pulled him beneath the surface, the death roll continuing underwater. Air bubbles marked the location of the struggle for approximately 45 seconds before the water became still. The crocodile surfaced briefly, then submerged again, dragging its prey toward a submerged log. Phiri had lost consciousness within seconds of being pulled under, the combination of traumatic shock, blood loss, and drowning ensuring rapid death. Banda ran to the village, bringing dozens of residents to the riverbank within minutes. Wildlife authority officers arrived the following day, confirming the attack through witness testimony and recovery of Phiri's rifle. The crocodile was never captured, as regulations protected the species within the ecosystem management area. It was September 9, 2015, on the remote wilderness of Kodiak Island, Alaska, where towering Sitka spruces and dense alder thickets created an impenetrable maze across the rugged terrain. The island's pristine landscape, shrouded in morning mist rolling off the North Pacific, harbored some of North America's most formidable predators. The temperature hovered near freezing as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, threatening to unleash the early fury of an approaching coastal system. Kester Frey, a 33-year-old commercial fisherman from Kodiak's bustling harbor, had ventured into the backcountry for a solo deer hunting expedition during the island's brief open season. His weathered hands, scarred from years hauling nets and battling fierce Alaskan storms, gripped his rifle with the confidence of someone who had spent his entire adult life wresting sustenance from nature's harsh embrace. The solitary hunt represented a welcome respite from the dangerous waters that claimed fishermen's lives with ruthless regularity. Friends later said he respected the wilderness, but familiarity can sometimes dull urgency. The circling ravens had drawn Kester deeper into the wilderness, their aerial dance signaling the presence of carrion hidden somewhere in the dense undergrowth. On Kodiak Island, where brown bears frequently cache kills for extended feeding, such signs demanded caution. Wildlife officials had documented numerous aggressive encounters between hunters and bears defending defending food sources, particularly during fall hyperphagia, when bears intensify feeding before winter denning. Yet the promise of locating deer in this remote drainage proved too tempting to ignore. Kodiak brown bears are the largest brown bear subspecies in North America. While exceptional males have been recorded above 1,400 pounds, most mature males typically range between 800 and 1,200 pounds. Standing over 9 feet tall on their hind legs, they possess claws up to 6 inches long and a bite force capable of fracturing bone. Fiercely protective of food caches, they often cover carcasses with debris and return repeatedly over several days. Despite their mass, they can sprint at speeds exceeding 30 miles per hour over short distances, accelerating with alarming efficiency across uneven tundra and forest floor. The fatal mistake occurred when Kester discovered a partially eaten deer carcass concealed beneath branches and moss in a small clearing. The ground around it showed disturbed soil and drag marks, classic signs of a cached kill. Instead of immediately retreating upon recognizing the evidence, he stepped closer, his rifle slung loosely over his shoulder. The metallic scent of blood hung thick in the cold air. He scanned briefly, but not thoroughly. In predator country, hesitation can erase margins of safety. The bear emerged from dense alder at roughly 20 meters. Weighing approximately 800 pounds, well within the typical range for an adult male, it launched forward in a defensive charge. The ground vibrated under its weight as it closed the distance in seconds, brush exploding outward in its path. Kester had no time to shoulder his rifle or access deterrent spray. At that range, reaction time shrinks to fractions of a second. The first swipe knocked him violently to the forest floor. Claws tore through scalp and shoulder, inflicting deep lacerations that caused immediate blood loss and disorientation. As he attempted to roll, the bear clamped its jaws onto his neck and upper back. The bite crushed cervical vertebrae and caused catastrophic neck trauma. The force likely disrupted his spinal cord, while severe vascular injury led to rapid hemorrhage. Incapacitated almost instantly, Kester was unable to mount resistance as the bear delivered additional mauling bites intended to eliminate what it perceived as a threat. The assault was defensive in nature, swift, overwhelming, and focused on neutralization rather than prolonged predation. Within minutes, the attack was over. The bear eventually disengaged and covered the body with forest debris, consistent with documented caching behavior. Rain moved into the area later that afternoon, partially obscuring tracks and complicating recovery efforts. When Kester failed to return to harbor and missed a scheduled radio check-in, fellow fishermen alerted authorities. Search teams combed likely hunting areas using GPS data from his skiff's last known mooring point. His remains were located days later in a remote drainage basin. Authorities launched a formal investigation. Field analysis concluded the incident was a defensive response at a food cache rather than an unprovoked predatory event. Such distinctions influence wildlife management decisions, and no immediate evidence suggested abnormal bear behavior in the region. Kodiak's fishing community mourned the loss of an experienced outdoorsman who understood wilderness risk, yet encountered the narrow window where caution failed. His family faced the devastating reality that expertise cannot eliminate every variable in bear country. It was March 26, 2017, when the dry season had begun to parch the teak forests of central Myanmar. For the farming village of Kyokpadaung, the crop-raiding elephant problem had reached a crisis point. Over 3 months, a solitary bull elephant had destroyed nearly 40% of the community's rice crop, threatening food security for the entire region. Village elders had petitioned wildlife officials multiple times, but bureaucratic delays prevented intervention. Families were growing desperate. Thant Za was a 42-year-old farmer who had lost his entire season's crop to the elephant's raids. His desperation led him to accept an offer from the village cooperative to eliminate the animal using a borrowed rifle, despite having no experience with dangerous game. The village pooled money for ammunition and agreed to support Thant's family regardless of the outcome. They had been tracking the elephant for 3 days, following the destruction path through the forest bordering agricultural areas. Fresh tracks that morning indicated the bull was less than a mile ahead, likely resting in dense teak forest, where visibility was limited to barely 30 feet. Asian elephants can weigh between 6,000 and 11,000 pounds, with adult bulls being significantly larger. While generally less aggressive than African elephants, Asian elephants are responsible for over 500 human deaths annually, primarily through crop-raiding conflicts. Bull elephants experience must, a period of elevated testosterone that increases aggression dramatically. During must, temporal glands secrete fluid, and temperament becomes extremely volatile. A charging elephant can reach 25 miles per hour, and the impact of several tons at that velocity is invariably fatal. The two men located fresh dung indicating the elephant had passed through less than an hour earlier. The forest was eerily quiet, birds and monkeys having fled ahead of the massive animal. Thant carried the rifle while Kaya served as spotter. They communicated only in whispers, acutely aware that the animal could be anywhere around them. They moved another quarter-mile when Kaya spotted the elephant through a gap in the trees. The bull was feeding on bamboo shoots, partially obscured by vegetation. Dark streaks of temporal gland secretion marked both sides of his head, clear evidence of must and peak aggression. Kaya gestured for Thant to stop, and both men crouched low, barely breathing. Thant raised the rifle, attempting to find a clear shot through dense foliage. Elephant anatomy requires precise shot placement, as vital organs are protected by massive bone and muscle. A shoulder shot targeting the heart and lungs offers the best chance, but the angle must be nearly perfect. Thant's shot was rushed and poorly aimed. The bullet struck the upper shoulder area but deflected off the massive shoulder blade, rather than penetrating to vital organs. The impact triggered an immediate response from the already volatile musk bull. The elephant trumpeted in rage, immediately identifying the direction of the threat. The massive animal charged without hesitation, crashing through bamboo and teak saplings with terrifying momentum. The distance was barely 70 feet, giving Thant no time to chamber another round. Both men turned to flee, but running from a charging elephant in dense forest was futile. The elephant smashed through vegetation that would have stopped humans. Kaya managed to dive behind a massive teak trunk, the tree's girth providing momentary protection. Thant was not as fortunate. The elephant caught him after barely 40 feet, its speed and momentum making escape impossible. The bull's trunk lashed out, striking Thant across the back and sending him sprawling face first into the forest floor. Before Thant could rise, the elephant's front foot came down on his upper back and head with the full weight of nearly 5 tons. The crushing impact was catastrophic and instant, causing injuries incompatible with survival. Death was immediate. The elephant stepped forward, bringing its second front foot down on Thant's lower body. The animal then wheeled around, searching for additional threats, before spotting Kaya behind the tree. The bull circled the massive teak, trumpeting and investigating, but did not press the attack. After nearly a minute, the elephant turned and crashed away through the forest. Kaya remained hidden for over an hour before cautiously approaching. The trampling had left remains barely recognizable as human. His report brought villagers and wildlife officials to the scene later that day. Wildlife authorities assembled a tracking team to locate and destroy the bull elephant, but the animal had already moved deep into the surrounding forest. Trackers followed its trail for 3 days before losing the signs entirely in increasingly remote terrain. With limited resources, authorities were forced to abandon the effort. The elephant was never found. Village authorities implemented improved crop protection measures, including electric fencing, to prevent future conflicts. It was October 3, 2016, when the plains of a vast savanna ecosystem in northern Tanzania stretched toward the horizon under cloudless sky. The short rains had begun to green the landscape, drawing massive herds back toward traditional grazing grounds. Among them moved family groups of elephants, matriarchs leading along ancient migration routes. Emmanuel Masanja was a 36-year-old former safari camp employee whose knowledge of the region had made him valuable to ivory poaching syndicates operating across the border. His dismissal from legitimate employment 3 years earlier had pushed him toward elephant poaching. The ivory trade paid far better than any legal work available. Masanja had spent months building connections within smuggling networks, eventually earning enough trust to organize his own operations, rather than serving as a hired tracker. This operation targeted a family group of 11 elephants moving through a remote section far from ranger patrol routes, including several adult females with impressive tusks. A single large elephant could yield tusks worth over $50,000. The syndicate had provided coordinates based on aerial spotters who tracked elephant movements from light aircraft, a common tactic for directing poaching teams toward high-value targets. Joining Masanja were 2 men. Juma Rashidi, 42, served as the primary shooter, his experience with large-caliber weapons making him the group's most reliable marksman. The third man, in his early 30s, would handle security and butchery once the animals were down. Both had worked with Masanja on previous operations, their trust built through shared risk and divided profits. African elephants represent the largest land animals on Earth, with adult females weighing between 6,000 and 8,000 pounds. These highly intelligent animals possess complex social structures centered around matriarchal family groups. The matriarch's experience guides the family through seasonal movements and danger responses accumulated over decades. When threatened, elephants employ sophisticated defensive strategies, with adults forming protective formations around calves. Wounded elephants are extraordinarily dangerous, capable of charging at speeds exceeding 25 miles per hour despite catastrophic injuries. Their mass and momentum make them nearly unstoppable once committed to a charge, capable of trampling humans into unrecognizable remains. The poachers located the elephant family around 2:30 in the afternoon, the animals resting in scattered shade near a seasonal waterhole. The matriarch, an enormous female with heavy tusks that curved well past her jaw, had positioned herself on the group's periphery, her elevated trunk testing the wind for danger. The rest of the family dozed in loose clusters, the calves tucked between the larger females, their small bodies barely visible in the shadows of their mothers. Rashidi established his shooting position approximately 80 yards from the resting elephants, using a termite mound for stability. The approach had taken nearly an hour, the three men crawling the final 200 yards on their stomachs through waist-high grass to avoid detection. The wind had cooperated, blowing steadily from the elephants toward the poachers and carrying their scent away from the matriarch's sensitive trunk. Even so, twice during the approach, a younger female had raised her head and scanned the grass line, freezing the men in place for minutes at a time before she resumed resting. His rifle was a modified .458 Winchester Magnum, powerful enough to penetrate elephant hide and bone when properly aimed. The plan called for killing the matriarch first, believing her death would fragment the family group and allow the poachers to pick off additional females before the herd could reorganize, though such assumptions often proved deadly. The first shot struck the matriarch shortly after 3 in the afternoon. The heavy bullet hit the side of her skull behind the ear, but the quartering angle was too steep, the round deflecting off the thick bone rather than reaching the brain. The bullet tore a deep furrow through hide and skull, causing massive bleeding and disorientation without delivering a killing blow. The massive animal staggered violently, blood streaming from the wound as she fought to remain upright. Her trumpet of pain and alarm galvanized the family into immediate action. Rather than scattering as the poachers had expected, the elephants formed a defensive cluster around the calves, their bodies oriented toward the threat. The matriarch, despite the severe head wound, turned toward the source of the gunfire. The wound had not reached her brain, and her defensive instincts drove her toward the perceived threat. Rashidi fired again, the second shot striking a younger female in the shoulder and shattering bone without penetrating vital organs. The wounded elephant's scream intensified the chaos. The matriarch began her charge, nearly 8,000 pounds of wounded elephant moving across the savanna with increasing momentum. Her gait was unsteady, her movements growing erratic as blood loss accumulated. Rashidi fired twice more, both shots striking the matriarch's chest. She stumbled, but momentum carried her forward. Masanja and the third man scattered in opposite directions, abandoning equipment in desperate attempts to escape. The matriarch's charge covered nearly 60 yards before her legs began to fail. Rashidi had remained at his shooting position, attempting to chamber another round when the massive elephant reached him. Her trunk struck him across the chest, knocking him backward and to the ground. The matriarch's front legs buckled as she reached the termite mound, her enormous body collapsing forward in an uncontrolled fall. Rashidi lay directly in her path, unable to move in time. Nearly 4 tons of dying elephant came down across his lower body, pinning him completely. The crushing weight caused injuries consistent with catastrophic damage to his pelvis, spine, and internal organs. Evidence at the scene indicated Rashidi likely survived briefly after being pinned, but the combination of crushed organs and massive internal bleeding would have made death inevitable. The matriarch appeared to have died shortly after collapsing. The accumulated blood loss from the head wound, chest shots, and the physical toll of the charge finally overwhelming her. Masanja and the third man regrouped at a distance but were too shaken and inadequately armed to approach, while the rest of the family remained near the fallen matriarch. The 2 survivors abandoned all equipment at the scene and fled on foot, attempting to reach a remote settlement over 30 miles away. The investigation that followed linked both survivors to the poaching operation through their confessions and evidence recovered at the scene, including the modified rifle, spent cartridge casings, and butchery tools that matched equipment used in previous ivory poaching incidents across the region. Masanja and the third man were arrested and eventually received substantial prison sentences for wildlife trafficking. The matriarch's body was recovered, along with Rashidi's remains. The younger female that had been shot in the shoulder was found dead nearby, having succumbed to her wounds overnight. The remaining family group had moved on, their ultimate fate unknown. It was October 3, 2017, when the golden aspens of Shoshone National Forest in Wyoming painted a deceptively beautiful backdrop for a deadly encounter with one of North America's most formidable predators. The dense timber stretched across steep mountain slopes, where shadows danced between towering pines, and the crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and danger. Lumina Trask, a 34-year-old wildlife photography assistant, was experiencing her first bow hunting season in these mountains. Her careful nature had served her well in photography, but hunting presented new challenges. Despite her inexperience with predator behavior around fresh kills, She possessed the patience and attention to detail that made her excellent at her craft. On this fateful afternoon, she was hunting with a friend, though they had temporarily separated to glass-opposing drainages for elk. The hunt had been successful beyond expectations. A magnificent bull elk had been harvested late in the afternoon within the dense timber. The forest told stories of recent animal activity: overturned logs with fresh claw marks, dark berry-filled scat, and multiple trees bearing distinctive scratches. The evidence painted a clear picture of active grizzly territory, but the excitement of a successful hunt overshadowed these critical warning signs. Grizzly bears are among North America's apex predators, with adult males weighing up to 800 pounds and possessing devastating strength. Their exceptional sense of smell can detect fresh blood and meat from miles away. These powerful omnivores are particularly dangerous during autumn, when they enter hyperphagia, a feeding frenzy to build fat reserves for winter. Fatal attacks, while uncommon, occur with greater frequency than other bear species, and the combination of hyperphagia, a fresh carcass, and a solitary human can create the perfect storm for a deadly encounter. Lumina's fatal mistake came when she began field dressing the massive elk alone, leaving exposed organs and blood without posting a lookout or maintaining awareness of her surroundings. The rich scent created an irresistible beacon for any predator within miles. A massive grizzly bear had been foraging in the area and detected the powerful scent trail, following it directly to the kill site. The bear's approach began with cautious investigation. Moving through the forest shadows with surprising stealth for such a massive creature, the animal circled the kill site from downhill cover. For several minutes, the grizzly observed from the timber's edge, its distinctive shoulder hump and broad head barely visible. The scent of fresh meat triggered powerful instincts tied to its desperate need to consume thousands of calories before winter. The bear huffed and shifted position, torn between its territorial aggression and the overwhelming drive to claim this unexpected bounty. The critical moment came when Lumina turned her back completely, her focus entirely absorbed by field dressing. The grizzly interpreted this as both opportunity and challenge. Without warning, the animal surged forward in a devastating charge. The initial impact knocked Lumina violently to the ground with bone-crushing force. The grizzly's powerful jaws immediately clamped onto her shoulder and upper arm, massive canine teeth puncturing through clothing and flesh with devastating pressure. The animal shook its head violently, designed to disable prey and assert complete dominance. Lumina's screams echoed through the timber as the bear's teeth found her face and scalp, tearing away tissue in savage bites. The grizzly's claws, each up to 4 inches long, raked across her torso and legs, leaving deep lacerations that severed blood vessels and damaged muscle tissue. Each swipe delivered incredible blunt force trauma, cracking ribs and causing massive internal bleeding. As Lumina attempted to crawl away, the grizzly returned to the attack repeatedly, biting at her arms, legs, and back in a display of the raw aggression these bears are known for. The forest floor became stained with blood as the assault progressed. The accumulation of injuries created a catastrophic medical crisis. Major blood vessels in her arms and legs had been severed, causing massive hemorrhaging. Blunt force trauma to her chest and abdomen had damaged internal organs, while shock began shutting down her body's vital systems. Without immediate medical intervention, survivability dropped to near zero within minutes. The combination of severe penetrating trauma, crushing injuries, massive blood loss, and physiological shock proved fatal as her body succumbed to the overwhelming damage. The grizzly maintained its aggressive behavior for several more minutes before finally retreating into the dense timber. When her hunting partner returned to their agreed meeting location, the horrific scene that awaited would haunt him forever. The discovery triggered an immediate response from Wyoming game and fish officials and local law enforcement. The remote location complicated the investigation, but physical evidence clearly indicated a grizzly bear attack. Wildlife officials launched an intensive search, ultimately locating and removing a large male grizzly bear from the area. Lumina's family and colleagues in the wildlife photography community mourned the loss of a talented and passionate individual who had dedicated her life to capturing nature's beauty. Her tragic death sparked renewed discussions about safety protocols for hunters working alone in grizzly country, particularly during the critical autumn feeding period. It was September 18, 2017, when the first autumn frost settled over the remote valleys of British Columbia's coast mountains. The salmon runs were winding down, leaving grizzly bears scrambling to accumulate fat reserves for hibernation. This period of hyperphagia made the animals both predictable and dangerous. Ivan Kozlov was a 47-year-old commercial fisherman based out of Prince Rupert, whose seasonal income had declined steadily as salmon stocks collapsed. The Russian immigrant had arrived in Canada 15 years earlier, building a modest life around commercial fishing that was now failing. Kozlov had discovered an alternative revenue stream through illegal wildlife trade, specifically the harvest of bear gallbladders for export to Asian traditional medicine markets. Bear gallbladders commanded extraordinary prices, fetching between $3,000 and $5,000 through the right connections. Over 3 years, Kozlov had killed approximately 15 black bears for their gallbladders, operating in remote areas where conservation officer presence was minimal. The transition to grizzly bears represented an escalation in both risk and potential reward. Kozlov's partner was 39-year-old Yuri Petrov, a fellow Russian immigrant who worked sporadically in the logging industry. Petrov had accompanied Kozlov on several previous hunts, demonstrating adequate skill with firearms and a willingness to participate in illegal activities. The target area was a remote salmon stream approximately 40 miles from the nearest maintained road, accessible only through dense coastal rainforest. The men had established a primitive camp 2 days earlier, observing bear activity and identifying several large grizzlies. Grizzly bears represent North America's most powerful terrestrial predator, with adult males commonly exceeding 800 pounds and reaching heights of 7 feet when standing upright. Their muscular structure and dense bone mass make them extraordinarily difficult to kill quickly. Grizzlies can sprint at speeds exceeding 35 miles per hour, covering short distances faster than any human can react. Their claws, measuring up to 4 inches, can cause devastating wounds with a single swipe, while their bite force exceeds 1,200 pounds per square inch. The morning began with heavy fog, reducing visibility to less than 50 feet along the stream corridor. Kozlov and Petrov took positions on opposite banks, approximately 100 yards apart. The first bear appeared at approximately 7:45 a.m., a large male moving along the stream bank directly toward Kozlov's position. The shot struck the bear in the shoulder area, but the angle caused the bullet to deflect off the dense shoulder blade rather than penetrating the chest cavity. The impact staggered the bear momentarily before pain and defensive rage overwhelmed any instinct to flee. 800 pounds of enraged grizzly charged directly toward the source of its pain. Kozlov attempted to chamber a second round, but the bolt handle slipped in his sweaty grip, costing precious seconds. The bear covered 40 yards in less than 3 seconds, its massive frame crashing through underbrush with terrifying speed. Kozlov managed to fire a second shot from the hip, but the round went wide. The initial impact knocked Kozlov off his feet, his rifle flying from his hands as the bear's momentum carried both of them to the ground. The grizzly bit down on Kozlov's shoulder and upper arm, the crushing force shattering his collarbone instantly. Kozlov screamed as the bear shook its head once, violently, then released. The bear stepped back momentarily, assessing whether the threat had been neutralized. Kozlov lay motionless, either from shock or instinct. But when Petrov's first shot cracked across the stream and struck the bear in the hindquarters, the animal spun toward this new threat, then back toward Kozlov. The sudden movement triggered the bear's defensive instincts again. The grizzly lunged forward and delivered a single devastating bite to Kozlov's head, its massive jaws closing around his skull with tremendous force. The damage was catastrophic and instant. Petrov's second shot hit the bear in the ribcage, and his third struck the spine. The grizzly collapsed immediately, its hindquarters paralyzed. The animal continued snapping and swiping for several seconds before blood loss caused it to go still. Kozlov had died from head trauma. The initial shoulder injuries, while severe, might have been survivable with immediate medical attention, but the final bite had caused damage incompatible with life. Petrov's satellite phone call to emergency services revealed their illegal activities. Police and conservation officers reached the scene via helicopter approximately 4 hours later. Petrov was arrested on multiple wildlife violations, eventually pleading guilty to charges resulting in substantial fines. The investigation revealed the extent of Kozlov's poaching operation through evidence recovered from his residence. It was October 28, 2017, in the remote backcountry of Montana, where endless expanses of snow-covered wilderness stretched beneath a steel-gray autumn sky. The temperature hovered just below freezing, and an early-season storm had dusted the high country in fresh snow that muffled sound beneath the timber. This was the narrow window when predators moved constantly, feeding with urgency before denning season. In that volatile stretch between fall and deep winter, the wilderness could turn deadly without warning. Lance Craig, a 29-year-old auto mechanic from Billings, had ventured deep into the mountains for a late October elk hunt. His calloused hands, stained with years of engine grease, gripped his rifle with the steady confidence of someone raised in these ranges. He understood the rhythms of Montana's seasons. Late October meant bulls were still active, snow made tracking easier, and bears, still feeding heavily before hibernation, were unpredictable around carcasses. Wildlife officials had documented heightened grizzly activity that fall. Hyperphagia, the biological drive to consume massive calories before winter, made bears intensely food-focused and more willing to defend a carcass. Several recent reports detailed bears claiming hunter kills within minutes of a shot echoing through timber. The scent of blood drifting across cold air could travel astonishing distances, sometimes over ridgelines and into neighboring drainages, where other predators traveled established game trails. In dense timber, visibility can shrink to mere yards, leaving little time to react. The grizzly bear, among North America's most formidable predators, can exceed 800 pounds in mature males. With claws up to 4 inches long and a bite force estimated between roughly 975 and 1,150 psi, they are built for dominance at a carcass site. Despite their bulk, they can sprint at speeds approaching 35 miles per hour in short bursts. In late fall, when calories mean survival and denning sites are being selected in higher elevations, confrontation risk rises sharply, particularly at fresh kill locations. The fatal mistake occurred after Lance harvested a mature bull elk in a small clearing bordered by dense lodgepole pine. Focused on field dressing the animal, he set his rifle on the ground several feet away to work more freely. Steam from the opened body cavity rose into the cold air, carrying a powerful scent plume downslope through the timber. Ravens had already begun circling overhead, their calls echoing sharply, often one of the first indicators that larger scavengers are nearby. The metallic odor of blood hung heavy in the still air. The bear approached from downwind. It emerged at roughly 25 meters, head low, ears forward, claiming behavior unmistakable. This was not a curious pass-through. It was a food defense charge triggered by proximity to a high-calorie resource. Lance turned at the last second, instinctively reaching for the rifle that was now out of reach, but the distance vanished in seconds across the snow-dusted ground. The impact drove him backward into the blood-streaked snow as the bear's forelimbs struck with crushing force. Claws tore through heavy canvas and insulated layers, opening deep lacerations across his back and shoulders. Before he could regain footing, the bear seized him at the neck and upper shoulder. Its canines penetrated deeply, damaging major vessels in his neck and inflicting catastrophic trauma to the cervical spine. The force of the bite compromised his airway while severe blood loss began almost immediately. He remained conscious only briefly as the bear maintained pressure to neutralize what it perceived as competition over the carcass. The mauling continued for several moments, measured not in cinematic instant death, but in devastating rapid trauma. Crushing bites fractured ribs and caused massive internal bleeding. The combination of spinal injury, vascular damage, and exsanguination proved fatal within minutes in the freezing alpine clearing, far from immediate medical aid. After disengaging, the grizzly shifted attention back to the elk, intermittently dragging debris and snow over Lance's body in behavior consistent with food caching near a claimed resource. Such partial covering is commonly observed when bears intend to return to feed, conserving calories by protecting the site from other scavengers. The clearing showed signs of prolonged feeding activity before the animal finally moved off. When Lance failed to return, search teams located him days later near the partially consumed elk. Investigators documented classic late-season carcass defense behavior during peak pre-denning activity, emphasizing that most fatal encounters in the region occur at close range and involve surprise at kill sites rather than prolonged predatory pursuit. Craig's death underscored a harsh, seasonal truth. Late October in grizzly country carries elevated risk, particularly when hunters are alone and focused on processing game. Even experienced outdoorsmen can be overwhelmed in seconds when scent, calories, and territorial instinct converge in the narrow window before winter dormancy. In Montana's high country, predator and prey remain bound by ancient rules. And in those final weeks before snow seals the mountains, survival belongs to the animal most prepared and most willing to defend its claim. It was September 8th, 2015, when the dry season had transformed the farmlands of northeastern Namibia into a landscape of dusty cattle trails and struggling vegetation. A leopard had been repeatedly targeting livestock across several properties in the district, killing 11 goats and 2 calves over 6 weeks. Local ranchers, frustrated by the slow permit process, pooled money to bring in Tobias Engel, a 38-year-old tracker and hunter who had built a livelihood eliminating problem predators across northern Namibia. He operated in legal gray areas, taking cash contracts and using methods wildlife authorities would never sanction. Over 5 years, he had killed multiple leopards, hyenas, and jackals. The work paid well, and Tobias had grown confident in his ability to outmatch any predator. Rather than setting up a baited blind or cage trap, methods that required patience and equipment he didn't want to invest in, Tobias opted for poison. It was cheaper, faster, and had worked for him before. He mixed a modified agricultural pesticide, illegal for wildlife applications but readily available through informal networks, into an improvised dose he estimated would be lethal within hours, though exact toxicity would depend on how much the animal consumed. He placed 3 poisoned goat carcasses along known hunting paths near the affected properties. On the 3rd night, drag marks indicated the leopard had fed at one of the stations. Erratic tracks and patches of vomit along the trail suggested the poison had taken effect, though not lethally. Tobias followed the signs for approximately half a mile before losing the trail in rocky terrain. He assumed the animal had retreated to die, though without recovering the body, he couldn't be certain. African leopards are solitary, territorial predators, with males in this region typically weighing between 120 and 170 pounds. They are remarkably resilient, capable of surviving injuries that would kill other species, including gunshot wounds, snare injuries, and partial poisoning. When injured or weakened, they become more defensive at close range, prone to attacking when cornered or startled rather than fleeing as a healthy animal might. Their retractable claws inflict deep lacerations, while their powerful jaws can cause deep puncture wounds and serious bone damage. What Tobias didn't realize was that the leopard had survived the sublethal dose, likely having vomited shortly after feeding. The animal was physiologically compromised but still mobile. The severe drought had concentrated the leopard's activity around the farms, one of the few reliable water sources in the area. Rather than retreating into unfamiliar territory while weakened, the leopard stayed close. 3 nights later, a fresh goat kill confirmed the leopard was still alive. Tobias, frustrated that his shortcut had failed, decided to hunt the animal directly. He staked out the livestock enclosure that night, armed with a rifle and spotlight, positioning himself behind a low wall about 25 feet from the kraal. The night was warm and still, with minimal wind to limit scent dispersal toward the surrounding brush. He waited for hours. Shortly after midnight, he heard the scrape of something dragging through dirt near the enclosure. He raised the spotlight and swept the beam across the kraal. Nothing. He stood and moved forward to check the far side, stepping away from his covered position into the open. The leopard had been resting in a dense thicket, barely 15 feet to his left, the same heavy brush that bordered the kraal and regularly attracted predators to its cover. Startled at close range by the sudden movement and light, the animal's weakened state reduced its ability to retreat quickly through the dense brush. Its defensive instincts took over. It charged. Tobias heard the rush of movement and began to turn, but the leopard hit him before he could bring the rifle around. The impact drove him sideways to the ground, the rifle clattering out of reach. The leopard's claws raked across his torso, opening deep gashes from shoulder to abdomen. Tobias threw his arms up to protect his throat, but the leopard's jaws tore into his right forearm before releasing and biting down on his neck and shoulder. The deep puncture and tearing injuries, likely involving major vascular damage, caused rapid blood loss as the animal shook its head violently. The attack lasted roughly 30 seconds before the leopard released its grip and retreated into darkness. Tobias lay motionless, blood pooling rapidly beneath him. A rancher heard the commotion and found him within minutes, loading him into a truck for the drive to the nearest clinic over 40 miles away. Tobias lost consciousness during the drive as circulatory collapse set in and stopped breathing before they reached the main road. The severity of the neck and torso wounds was consistent with hemorrhagic shock, rapid, unsurvivable blood loss without immediate trauma intervention. The investigation used wound analysis, tracks, and hair samples to confirm a leopard attack. The poisoned bait stations led authorities to seize Tobias's equipment and open an investigation into illegal predator control in the district. Wildlife officials tracked the leopard with dogs 2 days later, cornering it in dense brush approximately 3 miles from the farm. It was August 22, 2014, in a private hunting concession in Zimbabwe's Matabeleland North Province. The dry season had transformed the landscape into a golden expanse of dried grasses and scattered acacia. The concession operated as a trophy hunting operation, catering to wealthy international clients, with its own dirt airstrip for emergency evacuations. Garrett Landry was a 52-year-old real estate developer from Houston, whose wealth had funded hunting expeditions across 4 continents over the previous decade. His trophy room featured mounts from North American elk to Siberian brown bear, but he had never hunted African dangerous game. The allure of a Cape buffalo had proven irresistible, and he paid $42,000 for the 10-day safari package. Landry's experience had been limited to guided situations with significant safety margins. He had developed confidence that exceeded his actual skill level, a dangerous combination when facing animals capable of killing experienced hunters. The professional hunter assigned to his safari was Derek Botha, a 44-year-old Zimbabwean who had guided dozens of clients to successful harvests over 6 years. The hunting party located a bachelor group of Cape buffalo around 8:30, 4 bulls resting near a waterhole. Botha positioned Landry behind a termite mound at approximately 120 yards, selecting a mature bull with exceptional horn development. Cape buffalo rank among Africa's most dangerous animals, responsible for an estimated 200 human fatalities annually. Adult bulls weigh between 1,100 and 2,000 pounds, with heavily bossed horns, capable of goring through vital organs. Unlike many prey animals, wounded buffalo frequently circle back to ambush their pursuers. Their thick hide and dense bone make clean kills difficult, requiring precise shot placement. Wounded buffalo are notorious for waiting in thick cover and charging from close range with explosive acceleration. Landry's shot broke cleanly, but the round struck slightly right of the intended target. The .375 H and H Magnum bullet struck the bull in the gut rather than the vitals, penetrating the intestinal cavity without immediately incapacitating the animal. The wounded buffalo lurched to its feet with a bellow of pain and disappeared into thick Jesse bush before anyone could fire a follow-up shot. A gut-shot buffalo represented one of the most dangerous situations in African hunting. Blood loss would eventually kill the animal, but the process could take hours, and wounded buffalo possessed the strength and fury to kill multiple pursuers before succumbing. The blood trail led into increasingly dense cover, visibility dropping to less than 15 feet. Botha took the lead, his double rifle loaded with solid bullets. Landry followed 10 feet behind, hands visibly shaking. The tracker remained at a safer distance, monitoring their rear. The buffalo had traveled approximately 200 yards before stopping in the densest available cover, standing motionless in the shadows. When he detected movement, the massive bull committed to his charge. Botha identified the buffalo at barely 20 yards, the dark shape materializing from the shadows. The charge covered the distance in less than 2 seconds. Botha fired one barrel. The 500-grain solid deflected off the hardened boss plate, tearing away horn without penetrating the skull. The bull's right horn caught Botha in the left hip, lifting him off his feet and throwing him sideways. The horn tip penetrated deep into his upper thigh, consistent with femoral artery damage. He collapsed in the bush, blood pumping from the wound in powerful spurts, his rifle knocked from his grasp. The buffalo wheeled immediately. Landry had frozen during the initial charge, his rifle unfired, his body locked by the explosive violence. When the buffalo began its second charge, Landry turned to run. He managed 3 stumbling steps before the buffalo reached him. The impact drove him face first into the dirt, the bull's horns hooking under his body, lifting and tossing him before trampling him with crushing force. Massive hooves came down on his back and ribcage while a horn gore penetrated his lower back, causing catastrophic internal damage. The buffalo delivered 2 more deliberate gores before stepping back, his own injuries worsening. The bull staggered approximately 80 yards into the bush before his front legs buckled, and he collapsed. The tracker radioed for emergency assistance. The concessions helicopter reached the scene within 40 minutes, but both men were already dead. Botha had died from rapid blood loss consistent with femoral artery damage. Landry had died from massive internal trauma, his wounds likely unsurvivable even with immediate medical attention. The investigation confirmed the sequence of events through physical evidence at the scene, ruling both deaths as hunting accidents without criminal liability. The concession suspended operations for 3 weeks before resuming with enhanced safety protocols. It was February 14, 2016, when the unforgiving Arctic landscape of Resolute Bay, Nunavut, Canada, became the stage for a deadly encounter that would remind the world why polar bears are considered the Arctic's most formidable predator. The coastal pack ice stretched endlessly under a deceptively calm sky. This remote wilderness, where temperatures plummet well below freezing and survival depends on constant vigilance, was familiar territory for Dresden Keel. At 41 years old, Dresden was an experienced subsistence hunter who had spent years tracking seals and caribou across the frozen expanses of northern Canada. His sharp instincts and deep respect for the Arctic environment had sustained his family through countless winters in this harsh land. On this particular day, he was traveling alone by snowmobile to check his trap line near a remote ice formation along the floe edge, following animal tracks that promised a successful harvest before the weather turned. Radio contact with his settlement had been delayed by atmospheric interference, and the brief weather window meant he had to move fast. His rifle, carried with a round chambered and safety engaged as was standard practice in polar bear territory, would soon prove inadequate for the lightning-fast encounter ahead. The warning signs were everywhere for those who knew how to read them. Intersecting bear tracks crisscrossed the snow, telling the story of a large predator's recent passage. Crushed ice around old seal holes and the partially eaten remains of a seal nearby painted a clear picture of an active hunting ground. Fresh claw marks on nearby ice formations indicated recent feeding activity. The Arctic's apex predator was close, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would end in tragedy. Polar bears are the largest land carnivores on Earth, with adult males weighing up to 1,500 pounds and possessing the strength to crush a seal's skull with a single bite. Their incredible sense of smell can detect prey from over a mile away, and their ability to move silently across ice makes them nearly invisible until it's too late. These magnificent yet deadly creatures are capable of explosive bursts of speed that can reach 25 miles per hour across snow and ice. Their massive paws, equipped with razor-sharp claws up to 4 inches long, can deliver devastating blows that would instantly incapacitate most prey. Unlike other bear species, polar bears are true carnivores with no fear of humans, viewing them as potential food sources. Dreston's fatal mistake came when he dismounted his snowmobile and approached his trap line on foot, momentarily dividing his attention between the trap mechanism and the surrounding terrain. He had visually scanned the area, and seeing nothing but empty ice stretching to the horizon, assumed he had adequate distance from any threats. What he didn't know was that a massive adult polar bear, likely food-stressed and curious about the unfamiliar movement and sound of the snowmobile, had detected his presence from downwind and was moving to investigate. The bear approached with deliberate curiosity, using the natural undulations of pressure ridges not as calculated cover, but simply following the path of least resistance as it moved closer to assess this potential opportunity. The encounter turned violent with terrifying suddenness. The bear, determining that Dreston represented prey rather than threat, broke into a sudden charge across the hard-packed snow, its massive paws thundering against the ice as it covered ground with frightening speed. Dreston spun at the sound, bringing his rifle up and managing to disengage the safety, but the thick Arctic mitts and the sheer speed of the attack left him no time to acquire his target. The impact was devastating as nearly 1,000 pounds of muscle and fury slammed into him, knocking him onto his back with bone-crushing force that echoed across the frozen landscape. The bear's massive forepaws pinned Dreston's torso to the ice, its claws digging deep as it established complete dominance. The first bite targeted his head and shoulder, the bear's powerful jaws delivering crushing force to his skull and neck. The attack continued with relentless ferocity as the predator inflicted bite after bite, tearing at his upper body, face, and throat in a sustained mauling that lasted for a few terrible minutes. Blood stained the pristine white snow as the bear's teeth, measuring over 2 inches long, punctured through multiple layers of protective clothing and flesh, penetrating vital structures with each crushing bite. The massive trauma to his skull, the catastrophic damage to his neck and throat, and the resulting hemorrhaging proved rapidly fatal, though consciousness may have persisted through the initial moments of the assault. The bear had begun to feed and was attempting to drag Dreston's body toward a nearby pressure ridge when the sound of an approaching snowmobile engine carried across the ice. Another hunter from the settlement, who had grown concerned about Dreston's extended absence and come to check on him. The bear, startled by the mechanical noise and detecting a second human presence, abandoned its kill and retreated across the floe edge, disappearing into the Arctic wilderness. The entire encounter demonstrated the deadly efficiency of an opportunistic polar bear attack, leaving behind a scene that would haunt investigators for years to come. The discovery of Dreston's remains sparked an immediate investigation by local authorities and wildlife officials. The remote location and harsh conditions complicated recovery efforts, but the evidence clearly pointed to a polar bear attack. The incident sent shockwaves through the tight-knit Arctic community, where such encounters serve as stark reminders of the constant dangers faced by those who hunt in polar bear territory. His family and fellow hunters mourned the loss of a man who had dedicated his life to providing for his community in one of Earth's most challenging environments. The tragedy prompted renewed discussions about safety protocols for hunters working in polar bear habitats. It was August 22nd, 2014, when the morning sun rose over a private hunting concession in Zimbabwe's Matabeleland North Province. The dry season had transformed the landscape into a golden expanse of dried grasses and scattered acacia trees. The concession operated as a trophy hunting operation, catering to wealthy international clients seeking Africa's dangerous game. Marcus Webb was a 52-year-old real estate developer from Houston, Texas, whose considerable wealth had funded hunting expeditions across 4 continents over the previous decade. His trophy room featured mounts from North American elk to Siberian brown bear. Webb had never hunted African dangerous game, but the allure of adding a Cape buffalo to his collection had proven irresistible. He had paid $42,000 for the 10-day safari package. Webb's hunting experience had been limited to guided situations with significant safety margins, and he had developed confidence that exceeded his actual skill level, a dangerous combination when facing animals capable of killing experienced professional hunters. The hunting concession operated under questionable ethical standards that Webb had chosen to overlook, maintaining semi-habituated buffalo herds that reduced the challenge significantly. Professional hunter Derek Botha, 44, had worked for the concession for 6 years, guiding dozens of similar clients to successful harvests. Tracker Samuel Moyo, 38, accompanied every expedition. Webb had arrived 3 days earlier, spending the initial period sighting in his rifle and taking several plains game animals. His shooting had been acceptable, though Botha had privately noted that Webb displayed poor trigger discipline and a tendency to rush his shots when excited. Cape buffalo rank among Africa's most dangerous animals, responsible for an estimated 200 human fatalities annually across the continent. Adult bulls weigh between 1,100 and 2,000 pounds, with heavily bossed horns capable of going through vital organs with devastating efficiency. Unlike many prey animals that flee when wounded, buffalo frequently circle back to ambush their pursuers. Their thick hide and dense bone structure make clean kills difficult. The hunting party located a bachelor group at approximately 8:30 a.m., identifying 4 bulls resting near a waterhole. Botha identified a mature bull with exceptional horn development as the primary target. The approach required crossing 300 yards of open ground with minimal cover. Botha positioned Webb behind a termite mound at approximately 120 yards from the resting bulls. The shot broke cleanly, but Webb's excitement caused him to pull slightly right. The 375 H&H bullet struck the bull in the gut rather than the vitals, penetrating the intestinal cavity without immediately incapacitating the animal. The wounded buffalo lurched to its feet and disappeared into thick Jesse bush before anyone could fire a follow-up shot. A gut-shot buffalo represented one of the most dangerous situations in African hunting. The blood trail led into increasingly dense cover, with visibility dropping to less than 15 feet. Botha took the lead, his double rifle loaded with solid bullets designed for maximum penetration. The buffalo had traveled approximately 200 yards before stopping, standing motionless in the shadows, waiting for pursuers it knew would follow. Botha detected the buffalo's position first at barely 20 yards. He began raising his rifle when the buffalo charged. The explosive acceleration covered the distance in less than 2 seconds. Botha managed to fire one barrel, the solid grazing the buffalo's boss at an angle and tearing a chunk from the heavy horn plate without penetrating the skull. The impact barely slowed the charge. The bull's right horn caught Botha in the left hip, lifting him off his feet and throwing him into the undergrowth. The horn tip had punctured deep into his upper thigh, severing major blood vessels. Botha lay motionless where he fell, blood pooling rapidly beneath him. The buffalo wheeled around, searching for additional threats. Webb had stumbled backward during the initial charge, his rifle unfired. He turned to run, but managed only a few steps before the buffalo spotted him. The second charge was shorter but equally devastating. The horn caught Webb in the lower back, the impact driving him face first into the dirt. The buffalo gored him twice more in quick succession, the horn penetrating his abdominal cavity and causing catastrophic internal damage. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the attack stopped. The buffalo stepped back, snorted once, and staggered into the bush. Its own injuries were beginning to take their toll. Moyo had retreated and remained hidden until the buffalo moved away. His radio call brought an emergency response within 40 minutes. Botha had lost consciousness within minutes of being gored, the severed blood vessels draining his circulatory system. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Webb had died from massive internal trauma, his wounds too severe to survive even with immediate medical attention. The wounded buffalo was tracked and dispatched later that afternoon, found collapsed half a mile from the attack site. Authorities investigated, ruling both deaths as hunting accidents without criminal liability. The concession suspended operations for 3 weeks before resuming with enhanced safety protocols. It was July 3, 2017, along the muddy banks of the Limpopo River Basin in South Africa, where the ancient waterway carved its path through the heart of the African bush. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the riverine landscape, while the air hung thick with humidity and the ever-present scent of water that drew both prey and predator to its life-giving shores. Cicadas droned in the trees, and distant bird calls echoed across the slow-moving current. This seemingly tranquil setting would soon become the stage for one of nature's most brutal encounters. Bram Vost, a 51-year-old German construction executive, had traveled from Munich to fulfill a lifelong dream of experiencing an authentic African safari. His successful engineering firm had afforded him the luxury of this licensed plains game expedition, and his methodical nature had led him to research every aspect of the hunt for months beforehand. He had studied terrain maps, animal behavior patterns, and seasonal migration routes, confident that preparation would minimize risk. The safari camp, strategically positioned near a bend in the river channel, offered prime access to the diverse wildlife that congregated along the water's edge during the dry season. Local rangers had documented aggressive encounters along this stretch of riverbank, warning visitors about the unpredictable temperament of the massive herbivores that emerged from the water at dusk to graze. The Limpopo's muddy banks bore the telltale slide marks and massive footprints that served as reminders of what lurked beneath the deceptively calm surface. Bram had been tracking a small herd of antelope through the riverine brush, following their well-worn paths that led directly to the water's edge, where they came to drink as daylight faded. The hippopotamus is widely regarded as one of Africa's deadliest large mammals, weighing up to 4,000 pounds, with jaws powerful enough to splinter small watercraft depending on construction and impact angle. These deceptively placid-looking giants possess a bite force often estimated around 1,800 psi. They can run at speeds approaching 30 miles per hour on land over short bursts, faster than most humans can sprint. Their massive canine and incisor teeth, which can exceed 20 inches in length, function as formidable weapons capable of crushing bone and tearing through tissue with devastating efficiency. Despite their bulky appearance, hippos are surprisingly agile and become intensely territorial when defending access to water, calves, or established grazing routes. Wildlife officials consistently classify them among Africa's most dangerous large mammals due to the frequency and severity of defensive attacks. The fatal mistake occurred as twilight descended, and Bram positioned himself between the river and a well-established hippo grazing path. The fading light reduced visibility significantly, and the tall elephant grass provided concealment for the massive animal that had emerged from the water to feed. Bram failed to detect the hippo concealed less than 20 meters away, its gray bulk blending into shadow and vegetation. His focus remained fixed on the antelope tracks, unaware that he had stepped directly into the path of a territorial bull returning inland. The hippo's emergence from the reeds was sudden and explosive. Without warning, the multi-ton animal launched into a full-speed charge, its massive bulk thundering across the ground with startling acceleration. The earth vibrated beneath its weight. Bram had only seconds to register the movement before the enraged animal closed the distance, its cavernous mouth opening wide to expose curved ivory tusks slick with river water. The initial impact knocked Bram violently to the ground, his rifle thrown from his grasp as the hippo's head struck with the force of a battering ram. Before he could attempt to roll away, the animal's jaws clamped down across his torso. The immense compressive force fractured multiple ribs instantly. The elongated lower canines penetrated deep into his chest, while the crushing pressure compressed his thoracic cavity, inflicting catastrophic internal trauma. The hippo then lifted him and hurled him aside before trampling forward in a defensive surge. Severe blunt force compression likely drove fractured rib segments inward, lacerating lung tissue and causing rapid internal hemorrhage. The combination of skeletal destruction, pulmonary injury, and massive blood loss would have led to rapid collapse within minutes, with hypovolemic shock developing swiftly. As abruptly as it had begun, the attack ended. The territorial animal retreated toward the river, disappearing into the reeds with heavy splashes that echoed across the water. The clearing fell silent again, broken only by the rustle of disturbed grass and the metallic scent of blood in the humid air. By the time guides reached the scene, there was nothing to be done. Bram died from extensive internal bleeding and traumatic chest injuries consistent with large animal compression and penetrating bite trauma. Authorities reviewed the incident as a wildlife-related fatality, reinforcing long-standing safety advisories about avoiding known hippo corridors during transitional feeding hours at dawn and dusk. His death served as a sobering reminder that in the African bush, danger does not always announce itself with a roar. Sometimes it rises silently from the reeds, defending territory with prehistoric force and absolute finality. It was April 19, 2014, when the morning tide began flooding the narrow channels of the Sundarbans mangrove forest along the Bangladesh coast. The rising pre-monsoon tides had swollen the waterways, creating a maze of muddy channels and tangled root systems that stretched for miles. The air was thick with humidity, and the only sounds were the distant calls of kingfishers and the soft lapping of water against exposed roots. For Qadir Hossain, a 34-year-old former honey collector from the village of Satkira, these treacherous swamps represented opportunity rather than danger. Qadir had worked as a legitimate honey collector for nearly a decade before declining bee populations made the trade unsustainable. The transition to tiger poaching had been gradual but inevitable. A single tiger skin could fetch up to $15,000 through the right connections in Dhaka, enough to support his extended family for 2 years. He had completed 3 successful expeditions over the previous 18 months, each time returning undetected with his illegal cargo. The money had transformed his family's circumstances, and stepping away from the trade felt impossible. His partner, Rashid Mullah, was a 29-year-old fisherman whose knowledge of the tidal patterns made him invaluable for navigating the dangerous channels. The two men had departed before dawn, paddling a narrow wooden boat deep into restricted territory where ranger patrols were infrequent. Their target was a known tiger trail near a freshwater stream approximately 6 miles from the nearest ranger station. The journey had taken them through increasingly narrow waterways where the mangrove canopy closed overhead and filtered the light into dim green shadows. The plan was straightforward. They would position themselves along the trail during high tide when tigers often moved between hunting territories, wait for an opportunity, take the shot, and retreat before anyone discovered the kill. Qadir carried a modified rifle wrapped in waterproof cloth, while Rashid handled navigation and served as lookout. Bengal tigers are apex predators uniquely adapted to the Sundarbans mangrove environment. Adult males in the Sundarbans typically weigh between 300 and 400 pounds, smaller than mainland tigers due to the harsh mangrove habitat, and can measure over 9 feet in length. Unlike tigers in other regions, Sundarbans tigers hunt humans with surprising frequency, responsible for multiple fatal attacks each year across the delta. These tigers use water as cover, approaching prey silently through shallow channels where their striped coats blend with the shadows of mangrove roots. Their extremely powerful jaws are capable of crushing bone, typically targeting the throat to suffocate prey, or crushing the neck to cause rapid death. The two men had been waiting motionless for over 3 hours, the heat and mosquitoes testing their patience, when Rashid spotted fresh pug marks in the mud along the stream bank, roughly 40 feet away. The tracks indicated a large male, likely the same animal they had observed signs of during previous reconnaissance. Qadir carefully unwrapped his rifle, checking that the action remained dry as he positioned himself for a clear shot across the narrow channel. His hands were steady from experience, but his pulse quickened at the sight of the tracks. The animal was close. What neither man realized was that the tiger had already detected their presence. The animal had been moving parallel to their position through shallow water on the opposite bank, using the dense mangrove cover to mask its approach. The tiger moved nearly silent through the shallows, each massive paw placed deliberately to create minimal disturbance in the water. Occasionally, the animal paused, motionless, its eyes locked on the two figures in the boat, before advancing again through the tangled roots. Qadir was focused entirely on the stream bank ahead when the attack came from his right side. The tiger exploded from the shallow water barely 10 feet away, covering the distance in 2 enormous bounds. Qadir had no time to turn his rifle before the full weight of a large male tiger slammed into him. The impact knocked Qadir backward into the shallow water near the boat's edge. The tiger's jaws clamped around his throat and right shoulder, the crushing pressure fracturing his collarbone instantly. Qadir's rifle discharged once as it flew from his hands, the bullet striking harmlessly into the canopy. His scream was cut short as the tiger's bite closed off his airway. Rashid scrambled to the opposite end of the boat, unable to reach the rifle now floating several feet away. The boat rocked violently as the tiger maintained maintained its grip, pulling Kadir deeper into the tidal channel. The animal's massive weight dragged them both into water approximately 4 feet deep, where the muddy bottom and tangled roots made escape impossible. The tiger maintained the suffocating throat hold as it dragged Kadir through the shallow water, keeping him pinned beneath the surface. Kadir's struggles weakened over the next several seconds as the combination of the crushing bite and submersion took effect. His movements ceased as drowning and suffocation ended his life. The tiger held on for several more seconds before releasing the body, which settled partially submerged among the tangled mangrove roots nearby. The tiger turned briefly toward Rashid, who remained frozen at the far end of the boat, barely breathing, before disappearing back into the mangrove forest as silently as it had appeared. The entire attack had lasted less than 45 seconds. Rashid remained motionless for nearly 10 minutes before carefully retrieving the oars and paddling frantically toward open water, abandoning both the rifle and his partner's body to the swamp. Authorities recovered partial remains 2 days later after Rashid's anonymous report led investigators to the approximate location. Recovery was difficult in the tidal mangrove system, where currents, crocodiles, and scavengers had disturbed the scene considerably. The investigation revealed the poaching operation through equipment recovered nearby. Rashid was never formally charged, as he had fled across the border into India immediately after the incident. The tiger was never located. Despite increased ranger patrols, the vast mangrove system, spanning thousands of square miles of near-identical tidal channels, made tracking any individual animal effectively impossible. Tiger attacks on people working illegally in the forest were periodically reported throughout the region. It was September 18, 2017, when the first autumn frost settled over British Columbia's coast mountains. The salmon runs were winding down, leaving grizzly bears scrambling to accumulate final fat reserves before hibernation, a period that made them both predictable and extraordinarily dangerous. Ivan Kozlov was a 47-year-old commercial fisherman from northern British Columbia whose seasonal income had declined as salmon stocks collapsed. The Russian immigrant had arrived in Canada 15 years earlier, building a life around fishing that was now failing. Kozlov had discovered an alternative revenue stream through illegal wildlife trade, specifically bear gallbladders for export to Asian traditional medicine markets, commanding between $3,000 and $5,000 through smuggling networks. His partner was Yuri Petrov, a 39-year-old fellow Russian immigrant who worked sporadically in logging. Petrov had accompanied Kozlov on previous hunts, demonstrating adequate skill with firearms and willingness to participate for quick money. Their target area was a remote salmon stream, approximately 40 miles from the nearest road, accessible only through dense coastal rainforest. They had established a primitive camp 2 days earlier, observing bear activity and identifying several large grizzlies. The plan called for harvesting at least 2 animals before hiking out. Grizzly bears are North America's most powerful terrestrial predator, with adult males commonly exceeding 800 pounds. Their dense bone mass makes them extraordinarily difficult to kill quickly, requiring precise shot placement to vital organs. Grizzlies can cover short distances at over 35 miles per hour, with 4-inch claws capable of devastating wounds and bite force exceeding 1,200 pounds per square inch. When wounded, grizzlies typically charge immediately toward the source of pain, defensive aggression overriding any instinct to flee. The morning began with heavy fog reducing visibility to less than 50 feet along the stream corridor. Kozlov and Petrov took positions on opposite banks, approximately 100 yards apart, watching known feeding areas. The first bear appeared around 7:45, a large male moving along the stream bank directly toward Kozlov's position. The animal's outline materialized gradually through the fog, its enormous shoulder hump rising and falling with each step. At full approach, the bear's size became unmistakable, its head swinging low as it scanned the stream for salmon. The animal showed no awareness of Kozlov's presence, the fog and steady stream noise masking the human scent and sound. It was the kind of close-range opportunity poachers depended on, and it would leave almost no margin for error. Kozlov fired from a distance of approximately 60 yards, using a .30-06 rifle that was marginal for grizzly and unforgiving of poor shot placement. The shot struck the bear in the shoulder area, but the steep quartering angle sent the bullet through muscle without reaching the chest cavity, the dense shoulder blade deflecting it away from vital organs. The impact staggered the bear momentarily. Then pain triggered an immediate defensive charge. 800 pounds of wounded grizzly moved directly toward the source of its agony. Kozlov attempted to chamber a second round, but his panicked fingers fumbled the bolt action, costing precious seconds. The bear covered the distance with terrifying speed, its massive paws pounding the earth as it closed the gap. Kozlov managed to fire a second shot from the hip, but the round went wide, passing harmlessly through the fog. The bear was on him instantly. The initial impact knocked Kozlov off his feet, his rifle flying from his hands as the bear's momentum carried them both to the ground. The grizzly's jaws clamped around Kozlov's shoulder and upper arm, the crushing force shattering his collarbone. The bear shook its massive head violently once, the motion tearing muscle tissue and ligaments. Then it released briefly, reacting to movement across the stream. Kozlov lay motionless, either from shock or survival instinct. Across the stream, Petrov had raised his rifle and fired. The shot struck the bear in the hindquarters, causing it to spin toward this new threat. The sudden stimulus triggered the bear's defensive response again. The grizzly lunged forward and delivered a single devastating bite to Kozlov's head. The massive jaws closed with tremendous force. The damage was catastrophic and immediate. Petrov fired twice more in rapid succession. The second shot struck the bear in the ribcage, and the third hit the spine near the shoulders. The grizzly collapsed, its hindquarters paralyzed. The massive animal continued snapping and swiping for several more seconds before blood loss caused it to become still. According to the official investigation, Kozlov died from catastrophic head trauma. The initial shoulder injuries, while severe, might have been survivable with immediate medical attention, but the final bite had caused injuries incompatible with life. Petrov used his satellite phone to contact emergency services, revealing their illegal activities in the process. Helicopter evacuation reached the remote location approximately 4 hours later. Conservation officers recovered Kozlov's body and arrested Petrov on multiple wildlife charges. The investigation revealed evidence of their poaching operation, including harvesting equipment designed for removing bear gallbladders. Petrov eventually pleaded guilty to multiple wildlife charges and received substantial fines and a prison sentence. It was June 7, 2018, when the dense Satpura buffer forest of Madhya Pradesh, India, became the stage for a deadly encounter that would demonstrate why leopards are considered one of the world's most efficient and deadly ambush predators. The ancient woodland stretched across rolling hills, where towering sal trees created a canopy so thick that sunlight barely penetrated to the forest floor. This pristine wilderness, bordering one of India's most famous tiger reserves, was home to an incredible diversity of wildlife. Tabby Phipp, a 29-year-old wildlife photographer from South Africa, had traveled to India to document the region's elusive leopards and other predators. His aggressive pursuit of rare wildlife photographs had taken him across 3 continents, though he was completely unfamiliar with the behavior patterns of India's apex predators. On this humid evening, he was positioned near a natural game trail junction, close to a mineral-rich salt lick that attracted numerous species. The location had been carefully chosen by his local guide, who understood that the convergence of multiple animal trails near the salt lick created an ideal vantage point for wildlife photography. However, the guide had separated from Tabby earlier in the afternoon to scout alternative positions before the critical evening hours when most predators became active. The forest around the salt lick showed abundant signs of recent animal activity, with fresh tracks pressed into the muddy ground. The warning signs were unmistakable for those who understood the language of the forest. Repeated alarm calls from langur monkeys echoed through the canopy above, their sharp barks indicating the presence of a large predator in the immediate vicinity. The calls had been continuous for nearly an hour, growing more intense and frequent as darkness approached. Fresh scratch marks on nearby trees painted a clear picture of danger lurking in the shadows. Leopards are among the most adaptable and deadly big cats on Earth, with adult males weighing up to 200 pounds and possessing the perfect combination of stealth, strength, and killing efficiency. These solitary hunters are masters of camouflage, their rosette-patterned coats providing perfect concealment in dappled forest light. Unlike lions or tigers, leopards are exceptional climbers and can approach prey from virtually any angle. Their powerful jaws deliver killing bites with surgical precision, targeting the throat to suffocate prey or crushing the neck vertebrae to dispatch victims quickly and efficiently. Tabby's fatal mistake came when he remained at ground level after dusk, without the protection of an elevated mashan or constant vigilance. The approaching darkness that made wildlife more active also provided perfect cover for a leopard's hunting strategy. A large male leopard had been tracking the scent trails around the salt lick and had detected his presence from a considerable distance. Using the tall grass and scattered boulders as cover, the cat began its methodical approach. The attack materialized from the darkness with the silent efficiency that has made leopards legendary among big cat species. The leopard approached through the tall grass from directly behind Tabby's position, moving with the fluid grace that allows these cats to hunt successfully in the most challenging terrain. The animal's padded paws made no sound on the forest floor as it closed the final distance. The leopard's assault began with a powerful leap that covered the final yards in a single bound. The cat's massive paws struck Tabby's shoulders, driving him forward and down with tremendous force. Before he could react or cry out, the leopard's jaws clamped down on his throat with devastating power. The cat's canine teeth, measuring over 2 inches in length, punctured deep into the neck, crushing the windpipe and severing major blood vessels. The bite was delivered with the calculated efficiency of a predator that has evolved to kill quickly and silently. The leopard's powerful jaw muscles compressed with devastating force, the bite crushing vital structures in the neck and throat region while cutting off the airway completely. The attack caused rapid blood loss and asphyxiation, preventing any meaningful resistance. Tabby struggled briefly against the overwhelming force, but the oxygen deprivation quickly brought unconsciousness. Within seconds of the initial attack, Tabby's body went limp as the leopard maintained its suffocating grip on his throat. The cat's instinctive killing technique ensured that the victim was incapacitated within moments. The leopard then began dragging the body toward dense cover, demonstrating the incredible strength that allows these cats to haul prey twice their own weight. The leopard pulled its victim approximately 50 yards into a dense thicket of thorny bushes, where it began feeding on the upper torso and neck area. After feeding for a brief period, the leopard abandoned the remains and melted back into the forest shadows, disappearing as silently as it had appeared. The discovery of Tabby's remains the following morning triggered an immediate response from local wildlife authorities and police. The remote location and dense forest terrain complicated the investigation, but the evidence clearly indicated a leopard attack. Forest officials launched an intensive search for the responsible animal, though the vast territory made capture extremely difficult. The incident sent shockwaves through India's wildlife photography community, where such attacks on humans are extremely rare but always feared. Tabby's family and colleagues mourned the loss of an experienced photographer who had pursued dangerous wildlife encounters across multiple continents. It was October 3, 2018, and the endless plains of the Serengeti ecosystem stretched toward the horizon under a cloudless African sky. The short rains had begun to green the landscape, drawing massive herds of wildebeest and zebra back toward traditional grazing grounds. Among these herds moved smaller family groups of elephants, the matriarchs leading their families along ancient migration routes. Emmanuel Masanja was a 36-year-old former safari camp employee whose knowledge of the Serengeti had made him valuable to ivory poaching syndicates. His dismissal from legitimate employment 3 years earlier, following accusations of theft, had pushed him toward the lucrative world of elephant poaching. The decision had proven financially rewarding. The syndicate operated across the Tanzania-Kenya border region, targeting elephant herds in areas where enforcement varied. Chinese buyers paid premium prices for high-quality tusks, with a single large elephant potentially yielding ivory worth over $50,000. This operation targeted a family group of 11 elephants observed moving through a remote section of the ecosystem, far from ranger patrol routes. The group included several adult females with impressive tusks, as well as younger animals and calves that would be collateral damage in the planned assault. Joining Masanja were 3 other men. Juma Rashid, 42, served as the primary shooter, his experience with large-caliber weapons making him the most reliable marksman. Abdul Omari, 28, and Hassan Mwanga, 31, would handle butchery work. The team had traveled overnight by vehicle, covering the final miles on foot to avoid leaving tire tracks that could lead investigators to the kill site. They carried enough water and supplies for 3 days. African elephants represent the largest land animals on Earth, with adult females weighing between 6,000 and 8,000 pounds. Their intelligence rivals that of great apes, with demonstrated capacity for problem-solving, emotional memory, and complex social bonds. Elephant family groups are led by matriarchs whose experience guides the family through seasonal movements. When threatened, elephants employ sophisticated defensive strategies, with adults forming protective circles around calves. A charging elephant can reach speeds of 25 miles per hour, with enough mass to trample humans into unrecognizable remains. The poachers located the elephant family at approximately 2:30 p.m., animals resting in scattered shade near a seasonal waterhole. The matriarch, an enormous female with tusks extending nearly to the ground, had positioned herself on the group's periphery, her elevated trunk testing the wind for danger. Rashid set up his shooting position approximately 150 yards from the resting elephants using a termite mound for stability. The plan called for eliminating the matriarch first to cause chaos among the family and prevent organized defensive responses. The first shot struck the matriarch behind the ear, the 458 caliber bullet penetrating her skull, but failing to destroy the brain immediately. The massive animal staggered violently, blood streaming from the wound as she fought to stay upright. Her trumpet of pain galvanized the family into action. Rather than fleeing as expected, the elephants formed a defensive cluster around the calves, their bodies oriented toward the threat. Rashid's second shot struck a younger female in the shoulder, shattering bone but failing to penetrate vital organs. The wounded elephant screamed, and the matriarch's protective instincts overrode her own rapidly failing body. Despite the catastrophic head wound, the old female turned toward the poacher's position and charged. The ground shook as nearly 8,000 pounds of wounded elephant thundered across the savannah. Her gait was unsteady, her movements growing more erratic as blood loss and brain trauma took their toll. But momentum and rage carried her forward. Rashid fired twice more, both shots striking the matriarch's chest. She stumbled but kept coming. Masanja, Omari, and Mwanga scattered in different directions, abandoning equipment in desperate attempts to escape. The matriarch reached Rashid just as her front legs began to buckle. Her trunk lashed out, striking him across the chest and sending him sprawling. As she collapsed forward, her massive weight came down on Rashid's lower body, pinning him beneath nearly 4 tons of dying elephant. His pelvis and legs were crushed instantly, and the impact ruptured internal organs. Rashid's screams echoed across the savannah as he lay trapped beneath the matriarch's body, unable to free himself. Masanja had fled approximately 60 yards when he stumbled. Looking back, he saw the matriarch motionless on the ground, Rashid's upper body visible beneath her massive form. The other elephants trumpeted in alarm, several moving protectively around the fallen matriarch. Rashid died over the following minutes, the crushing weight on his lower body causing catastrophic internal bleeding that no amount of struggle could overcome. The matriarch had succumbed to her wounds moments after the impact, her final act ensuring that at least one of her attackers would not escape. Masanja, Omari, and Mwanga regrouped at a distance, watching as the elephant family lingered near the matriarch's body. They were too shaken to attempt recovering their equipment or Rashid's body. Without adequate water and fearing the remaining elephants, the 3 survivors fled on foot across the savannah. Omari had been clipped by the matriarch's trunk during her charge, cracking several ribs and causing internal bruising. By the second day, every breath had become agony. His pace slowed considerably as sharp pain radiated through his chest with each step. Masanja and Mwanga took turns supporting him as they staggered across the plains. The 3 men reached a remote village on the 3rd day, collapsing at the edge of the settlement. Omari was barely conscious, his breathing shallow, his skin pale from dehydration. Village elders summoned medical assistance, but the men's confessions quickly drew the attention of local authorities. Omari was transported to a hospital where doctors discovered fractured ribs and internal bleeding. He survived following emergency surgery, but faced months of recovery. Masanja and Mwanga were treated for severe dehydration before being taken into custody. Their confessions led authorities to the scene, where Rashid's body was recovered from beneath the matriarch's carcass. The younger female had also succumbed to her shoulder wound overnight. The remaining family group had moved on, their fate unknown. Tanzanian authorities charged all 3 survivors with wildlife trafficking. Omari's trial was delayed by his medical condition, but all 3 eventually received substantial prison sentences. The matriarch's final charge had cost one poacher his life and left another with injuries that would never fully heal. It was May 21, 2018, along the treacherous banks of the Zambezi River in a remote concession area of Zimbabwe, where the mighty waterway carved its ancient path through the heart of southern Africa. The late afternoon sun cast dancing reflections across the muddy current, while the air hung heavy with humidity and the constant buzz of insects that thrived in this aquatic ecosystem. Daxon Thorpe, a 46-year-old American entrepreneur from Colorado, had invested his considerable wealth in this once-in-a-lifetime licensed plains game safari. His successful tech company had afforded him the luxury of hunting Africa's most prestigious game, and his methodical business approach had led him to research every aspect of the expedition for months. The safari camp, positioned strategically along a bend in the Zambezi, offered access to some of Zimbabwe's most diverse wildlife populations that congregated along the life-giving waters during the dry season. Earlier that morning, safari guides had pointed out fresh crocodile slide marks along the muddy banks, explaining how these ancient predators used the same pathways for generations. The Zambezi River system harbors some of Africa's largest Nile crocodiles, and across sub-Saharan Africa, crocodile attacks collectively account for an estimated estimated 1,000 human fatalities each year, with the Nile crocodile responsible for a significant share. Incidents are documented regularly along major river systems like the Zambezi, particularly in rural communities and fishing zones. Daxon had successfully harvested a magnificent impala near the water's edge, and the animal's final moments had carried it into the shallow reeds, where it lay partially submerged in the murky water. The Nile crocodile, Africa's largest freshwater predator, represents one of nature's most perfectly evolved killing machines. Large males can exceed 16 to 20 feet in length and weigh well over 1,000 pounds. Biomechanical testing of large specimens has recorded bite forces in the range of approximately 3,700 to 5,000 pounds per square inch, among the most powerful measured in any living animal. Their armored bodies, powered by massive tail muscles, can launch them from water with explosive speed, while their conical teeth are designed to grip and hold rather than chew. Crocodiles are ambush predators that can remain motionless for hours, their eyes and nostrils barely breaking the surface as they wait for prey to venture within striking distance. The fatal mistake occurred when Daxon approached the shoreline alone to retrieve his downed impala from the shallow water. His safari guide had momentarily returned to camp to gather additional equipment, leaving the American entrepreneur standing within striking range of the muddy bank. The murky water concealed the massive predator that had been drawn by the scent of blood and the vibrations of the struggling antelope. Daxon waded into knee-deep water, completely unaware that death lurked beneath the surface less than 10 feet away. The crocodile's attack came without warning as the massive reptile exploded from the depths with prehistoric fury. Its enormous jaws, lined with roughly 60 to 70 conical teeth, clamped down on Daxon's lower leg with bone-crushing force. The initial bite shattered his tibia and fibula while the interlocking teeth punctured deep into muscle and tendon, creating a vice-like grip that no human strength could overcome. The predator immediately initiated its signature death roll, using its powerful body to spin violently in the water while maintaining its crushing hold. The rotational force tore ligaments and soft tissue as Daxon's leg twisted beyond its natural limits, the sickening snap of bone echoing across the riverbank. Each revolution drove the crocodile's teeth deeper, while the torque destabilized his entire body. Rather than releasing him immediately, the crocodile dragged its victim into deeper water, propelling both predator and prey toward the river's center with sweeping strokes of its tail. Nile crocodiles commonly drown large prey before feeding, often wedging carcasses beneath submerged branches or debris to soften them. Daxon's desperate attempts to reach the surface were thwarted by the reptile's relentless grip and repeated submersions. The drowning process unfolded in brutal efficiency. Water filled his lungs as he was forced under again and again, each submersion longer than the last. Massive blood loss from his mangled leg compounded the hypoxia. Within minutes of the initial strike, the combination of traumatic injury and prolonged submersion proved fatal. The crocodile eventually secured the body beneath submerged debris near the riverbank. Hours later, shifting currents dislodged the remains, allowing them to surface downstream where recovery teams located them bearing the unmistakable puncture wounds and crushing rotational injuries characteristic of a large crocodilian attack. The cause of death was determined to be drowning, complicated by severe traumatic injuries to the lower extremity. Zimbabwean wildlife authorities launched an investigation into the incident, while safari operators reviewed safety protocols regarding carcass retrieval near crocodile-inhabited waters. The international hunting community mourned another tragic loss, while Daxon's family in Colorado struggled to comprehend how their safety-conscious patriarch had fallen victim to one of Africa's most efficient aquatic predators. It was July 12th, 2016, when the Congo River flowed broad and sluggish through the dense rainforest of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The dry season had reduced water levels slightly, exposing muddy banks where hippos hauled out during evening hours. For Etienne Mobotu, a 39-year-old commercial bushmeat hunter from Mbandaka, the hippopods represented valuable inventory for the illegal meat trade supplying restaurants across Kinshasa. Etienne had been hunting hippos for nearly 6 years, operating from a narrow wooden canoe with an outboard motor. The business supported his extended family and employed 2 assistants who handled butchering and transport. He had grown confident in his ability to judge distances and retreat times, perhaps too confident. This expedition targeted a pod of 8 hippos in a quiet tributary approximately 5 miles from the main river channel. The pod included several large adults and at least 2 calves. Their presence made the operation more dangerous, but indicated the adults would be reluctant to abandon the area. Etienne approached alone that afternoon, his assistant having remained at base camp. The canoe carried a modified rifle and enough fuel for rapid withdrawal. His plan was to target a large adult from approximately 50 feet, allowing enough distance to retreat before the pod could react. The tributary was narrow here, barely 60 feet across, with dense overhanging vegetation on both banks. The water was dark and opaque, revealing nothing of what lay beneath the surface. Hippopotamuses are among Africa's most dangerous large mammals, responsible for an estimated 500 human deaths annually. Adult bulls can weigh up to 4,000 pounds and are fiercely territorial, particularly in water. Despite their bulky appearance, hippos move with explosive speed and can outrun humans over short distances on land. Their massive jaws open to 150 degrees and deliver crushing bite force, capable of splintering bone and severing limbs. Etienne positioned his canoe approximately 60 feet from the pod, drifting upstream to minimize engine noise. The hippos were partially submerged, only their eyes and ears visible above the waterline, watching him with an unblinking stillness that should have served as warning. He identified a large bull positioned slightly away from the others and raised his rifle to take the shot. The rifle's report echoed across the water as the bullet struck the bull in the shoulder area, but the angle caused the round to deflect off the massive shoulder blade rather than penetrating the chest cavity. The bull bellowed in pain, lunging upward. The rest of the pod erupted into motion, their defensive instincts triggered by the gunshot and their companions' distress. Etienne immediately started the outboard motor, attempting to turn downstream, but the wounded bull reacted to the disturbance, the canoe now drifting between the animal and the deeper channel, and charged through the water with shocking speed, closing the distance within seconds, its massive bulk creating a bow wave that rocked the canoe violently. The hippo rammed the canoe from below, its enormous head striking the hull with enough force to flip the craft sideways. Etienne was thrown into the water, his rifle clattering beneath the surface. Before he could orient himself, the hippo's jaws clamped onto the hull, splintering the craft with a single crushing bite. Etienne surfaced, gasping directly beside the enraged bull, attempting to swim toward the nearest bank 40 feet away, but the bull was already repositioning. The massive jaws found Etienne as he tried to swim clear. The bull bit down on his torso, fracturing ribs and driving bone fragments into both lungs. The hippo tossed him sideways with a violent shake of its head, then lunged forward and bit down again. Etienne's scream was cut short as blood filled his airways. The hippo released and submerged after the second bite. Etienne floated face down, his body going into shock from the catastrophic injuries. Blood spread across the water's surface as the current carried him downstream. He gradually lost consciousness over the next 30 seconds or so, drowning before internal bleeding could complete what the crushing bites had started. The pod remained agitated for several minutes before gradually settling. Etienne's body was recovered 3 days later, snagged on submerged branches approximately 2 miles downstream. Authorities identified his bushmeat operation through evidence at his base camp, though no charges could be filed given his death. The hippo pod remained in the tributary, but the wounded bull's shoulder wound became severely infected over the following weeks. Local fishermen reported the animal behaving erratically and charging boats unprovoked. A group of hunters from Etienne's network eventually tracked and killed the bull roughly a month after the attack, butchering the carcass for the same meat trade Etienne had supplied. It was October 7, 2015, when the Luangwa River flowed sluggishly through the South Luangwa Valley. The late dry season had reduced the river to a fraction of its wet season width, concentrating wildlife along remaining water sources. The morning had dawned clear and hot, with temperatures already climbing toward 90 degrees Fahrenheit by mid-morning. Joseph Phiri was a 41-year-old subsistence hunter from a village on the outskirts of the valley's national park. Unlike organized syndicates targeting high-value species, Phiri operated independently, selling bushmeat to local markets. He had hunted the Luangwa Valley since childhood, learning wildlife patterns and techniques for evading park rangers. The morning's expedition included his 23-year-old nephew, who was learning the hunting trade. Their target was a small group of puku observed grazing along the riverbank, approximately 2 miles upstream. The route required crossing a shallow inlet where the river had receded, leaving a muddy channel approximately 30 feet wide and less than 3 feet deep. Phiri had crossed this channel dozens of times during previous dry seasons without incident. Nile crocodiles are Africa's largest freshwater predator, with mature males commonly exceeding 16 feet and weights approaching 1,650 pounds. They possess the strongest bite force of any living animal, exceeding 3,700 pounds per square inch, sufficient to crush bone and dismember prey. Crocodiles are ambush predators that can remain submerged and motionless for over an hour, completely hidden below murky water. A large crocodile had surfaced briefly upstream shortly before the crossing. Villagers identified it as an exceptionally large male, estimated at 17 feet. known to frequent this stretch during the dry season. Fury entered the water first around 8:45, rifle held above his head. The muddy water obscured everything below the surface. His nephew remained on the bank, preparing to follow. Fury was approximately halfway across, the water reaching his waist, when the attack occurred. The crocodile's strike came with explosive force, massive jaws emerging from the murky water and clamping around Fury's right thigh and hip. The interlocking teeth penetrated deep into muscle tissue, grinding against bone. Fury's rifle flew from his grasp, disappearing into the churning water. The crocodile immediately hauled Fury off his feet, dragging him toward the deeper channel with powerful sweeps of its tail. His nephew saw his uncle's arms claw at the surface as his body was pulled through the shallows, the animal's momentum unstoppable. Once the crocodile reached deeper water, it initiated the death roll, spinning its massive body while maintaining its crushing grip. The water erupted into churning white froth as the sheer force of the rotation became visible from 30 feet away. Fury's body wrenched violently through the first rotation, his arms surfacing briefly before being pulled under. The spinning continued through at least 2 more rotations, each one dragging Fury deeper into the channel. The muddy water turned dark where the struggle was concentrated. His nephew watched helplessly from the bank as Fury disappeared beneath the surface. He had picked up a rock but had no clear target. The crocodile and his uncle now fully submerged. Air bubbles marked the location of the struggle for less than a minute before the water surface became still. The channel settled back to its sluggish current, as though nothing had happened. The only evidence, a slowly expanding dark stain drifting downstream. The crocodile had dragged Fury into deeper water, the combination of catastrophic injuries and submersion, likely causing death within minutes. His nephew ran to the village immediately, bringing dozens of residents to the riverbank within an hour. Park officials arrived the following day, confirming the attack through witness testimony and recovery of Fury's rifle from the shallow crossing point. Partial remains were recovered approximately 50 yards downstream 3 days later during the official search. The crocodile was never captured or destroyed, as regulations protected the species within the park ecosystem. The investigation concluded that Fury had been engaged in illegal hunting activities at the time of the fatal attack. The incident prompted renewed warnings about river crossings during the late dry season, when crocodiles concentrated in remaining deep pools. It was September 22, 2015, when the vast wilderness of the Talkeetna foothills in Alaska became the setting for a deadly encounter that would demonstrate why bull moose during rutting season are considered one of North America's most dangerous animals. The rolling terrain stretched endlessly under the crisp autumn sky, where dense willow thickets created natural corridors that funneled wildlife movement through the landscape. This remote region, known for its abundant moose population and challenging hunting conditions, had provided subsistence opportunities for Alaskan families for generations. Vorstrand, a 47-year-old utility lineman from Anchorage, had spent his entire life hunting these unforgiving landscapes to provide meat for his family. His decisive nature and decades of experience tracking wounded game had made him a respected hunter among his peers, though his confidence sometimes led him to take risks that others would avoid. On this particular afternoon, he was following the blood trail of a bull moose he had wounded earlier during the peak of rutting season, when testosterone-fueled aggression makes these massive animals extremely unpredictable. The tracking had led Vorst deep into a maze of dense willow thickets that limited visibility to mere yards in any direction. The thick vegetation created natural tunnels through the landscape, forcing both hunter and prey to follow predetermined paths where encounters could happen with little warning. His family members were spread across the area, working together to recover the wounded animal before darkness fell. The warning signs were everywhere for those experienced enough to recognize them. Broken brush marked the passage of something massive moving through the willows with increasing desperation. Deep grunts and heavy breathing sounds echoed from somewhere ahead, indicating a large animal in distress. The blood trail was becoming more erratic, suggesting the wounded bull was becoming increasingly agitated and unpredictable. Moose are the largest members of the deer family, with mature Alaskan bulls weighing up to 1,500 pounds and standing over 6 feet tall at the shoulder. During rutting season, these normally docile giants transform into aggressive powerhouses driven by hormonal surges that eliminate their natural fear of humans. Their massive antlers, spanning up to 6 feet across, serve as formidable weapons capable of delivering devastating blows. However, it is their hooves that pose the greatest threat. Hard-edged and backed by tremendous leg strength, they can deliver crushing strikes with the force of sledgehammers. Vorst's fatal mistake came when he advanced into the thick willow cover while pursuing the wounded bull, entering terrain where the massive animal held every advantage. The dense vegetation that provided concealment for his approach also eliminated any possibility of retreat once the encounter began. The wounded bull had taken refuge in the heart of the thicket, where its dark coat blended perfectly with the shadows. The attack erupted with explosive violence as the bull charged from concealment at extremely close range. The massive animal burst through the willow screen like a freight train, its enormous bulk crashing through vegetation with explosive short-range acceleration. The bull's head was lowered in an aggressive posture, its massive antlers leading the charge as over 1,000 pounds of enraged muscle bore down on the hunter. The initial impact was devastating as the bull's broad chest and shoulder struck Vorse with bone-crushing force, launching him backward through the air before he crashed to the ground. The collision knocked the wind from his lungs and sent his rifle flying into the dense brush, leaving him completely defenseless. The enraged bull immediately began stomping with methodical brutality, its massive hooves striking with the precision of a jackhammer. Each hoof, measuring nearly 6 inches across with naturally hardened edges, delivered crushing blows that shattered bone and pulverized tissue. The strikes targeted Vorse's chest, the tremendous weight and force collapsing his ribcage and crushing the organs beneath. The bull's front hooves struck repeatedly in rapid succession, each blow driven by powerful leg muscles. The impacts created a devastating pattern of trauma across the victim's torso, with multiple ribs fracturing and splintering under the tremendous force. The crushing pressure ruptured major blood vessels and tore through vital organs, causing massive internal hemorrhaging. Additional strikes targeted the head and neck region, where the concentrated force of the bull's weight caused catastrophic skull fractures and severe brain trauma. The combination of crushing injuries to the chest and head created catastrophic damage throughout his body. Blood rapidly filled his chest cavity from ruptured vessels, while traumatic brain injuries disrupted all vital functions. Vorse lost consciousness within seconds as his brain was deprived of oxygen from the massive blood loss and direct trauma. He succumbed to his injuries within minutes as internal bleeding and the cumulative effects of the brutal assault overwhelmed his body's ability to sustain life. The attack continued for several more devastating seconds before the bull's rage finally subsided and the animal withdrew deeper into the willow thicket. Troopers and wildlife officials launched an immediate investigation into the incident, though the remote location and challenging terrain complicated their efforts. The attack highlighted the extreme dangers faced by hunters pursuing wounded moose during rutting season, when these normally docile animals become unpredictable killing machines. Vorse's family and fellow utility workers mourned the loss of a dedicated provider who had spent his life working in some of Alaska's most challenging conditions. His death served as a stark reminder that even the most experienced hunters can fall victim to the split-second decisions that separate life and death in the wilderness. It was March 14, 2016, when the moonless night provided perfect cover for 3 men crossing the border from Mozambique into South Africa. The dry winter season had left the bushveld parched and brown, with visibility reduced to mere feet in the thick African darkness. The private game reserve they targeted bordered Kruger National Park, an area known for its thriving rhino population and minimal security presence. Victor Ndlovu was a 38-year-old former mine worker from the village of Masingir, located just across the Mozambican border. The collapse of the local mining operation 3 years earlier had left him desperate to support his extended family of 11. The rhino horn trade offered money that legitimate work could never match. Victor had completed 7 successful poaching expeditions over the previous 18 months, building a reputation among syndicate operators as reliable. Accompanying Victor were cousins Ernesto Macamo, 29, and Paulo Macamo, 34. Ernesto served as the group's tracker, his bushcraft skills honed through years of subsistence hunting. Paulo carried a modified .458 Winchester Magnum, capable of dropping a rhino with a single well-placed shot. Each man would receive approximately $3,000 upon delivery of a horn to a middleman in Johannesburg. The trio crossed the border fence at approximately 11:30 p.m., navigating by GPS coordinates from an inside contact who had confirmed the location of a breeding pair of white rhinos that frequented a watering hole roughly 4 miles from the perimeter fence. The plan was straightforward: locate the rhinos, eliminate the animals, harvest the horns, and return to Mozambique before sunrise. Victor led the group through the dense Mopane woodland, their footsteps muffled by dried leaves covering the sandy soil. The men communicated through hand signals, maintaining complete silence until they located their target. The reserve's anti-poaching unit consisted of only 4 rangers covering over 15,000 acres, making comprehensive nighttime patrols virtually impossible. African lions represent the continent's apex terrestrial predator, with adult males reaching weights of 420 pounds and lengths exceeding 9 feet from nose to tail. These powerful carnivores possess exceptional night vision, approximately 6 times more sensitive than human eyes. Their hunting strategy relies on coordinated ambush tactics. A lion's bite force exceeds 650 pounds per square inch, capable of crushing bone and severing major blood vessels with devastating efficiency. During the dry season, prides concentrate near water sources, making watering holes particularly dangerous after dark. Based on tracks recovered at the scene, investigators determined the group had traveled approximately 2 miles before encountering fresh lion prints in the sandy soil. The prints indicated multiple animals moving in the same direction as the poachers were heading. Evidence suggested the men chose to continue regardless, likely confident that lions would avoid humans and that their firepower could discourage any curious predators. This assessment would prove fatally incorrect. A pride had been hunting along the same route that night, following a small herd of impala toward the watering hole. 6 lionesses and 2 subadult males were known to frequent the area during the dry season. The poachers had unknowingly walked directly into active hunting territory. What happened next was pieced together from physical evidence at the scene. At approximately 1:15 a.m., the pride attacked. The lead lioness struck Victor from behind, 400 pounds of muscle and claw driving him face first into the ground. His rifle discharged harmlessly into the air as it flew from his grasp. The gunshot split the night. Based on evidence at the scene, investigators believe the lioness released her initial grip momentarily, startled by the deafening blast. The rest of the pride scattered into the darkness as the sound echoed across the bushveld. Victor lay face down in the dirt, blood pooling from deep claw wounds across his back. But the lioness recovered quickly. Evidence showed she attacked again within seconds. Her powerful jaws clamped around Victor's throat, applying the crushing pressure that lions use to suffocate prey. Victor's struggles would have weakened rapidly as his airway collapsed. Paulo's body was found approximately 15 feet from his fallen rifle, suggesting he had attempted to raise the weapon before a second lioness intercepted him. Bite marks on his right arm indicated the crushing force had shattered bone, likely causing him to drop the heavy rifle. The fatal wounds were concentrated around his throat, consistent with suffocation. Ernesto's remains were discovered nearly 300 yards from the initial attack site, indicating he had attempted to flee. Track evidence showed a subadult male had pursued him. The impact had shattered 3 ribs, with bone fragments puncturing the right lung. The killing bite had targeted his head and face. He had suffocated over several minutes as blood filled his airways. The pride regrouped near Victor's body as the night settled back into silence. Evidence indicated they fed cautiously, likely made nervous by the earlier gunfire. They abandoned the remains well before dawn, retreating deeper into the bush. Reserve rangers discovered the scene at 7:30 a.m. after noting vulture activity in the area. The scattered equipment and weapons immediately identified the victims as poachers. Investigators recovered partial remains, eventually identifying the men through DNA comparison with family members in Mozambique. The investigation confirmed poaching intent through recovered weapons and butchering tools. Reserve management increased night patrol frequency following the incident.